Today, we're breaking down the most lethal and shocking animal encounters we covered on Animal Encounters in 2025, featuring the year's most unforgettable close calls. Let's dive straight in. It was June 14th, 2017, in Phatthalung, a quiet province in southern Thailand, where the river runs slow and brown through the mangrove edges. The day was hot, the air thick and still, and the water carried a faint, sour smell after a week of rain. A few tourists stood on the bank, their cameras raised toward a man waist-deep in the shallows. What began as a small crowd's amusement would end as the village's most grim story, one that no one wanted to retell, but none could forget. Prasert Wanachai, 38, worked as a boat repairman near the pier. He had lived by the river his entire life, fixing outboard motors and patching old hulls for fishermen and guides. He was known locally for his humor, always talking loud, teasing visitors, making them laugh. It earned him small tips and a kind of notoriety. The foreigners called him as the River Joker. He liked the attention. He had grown up watching crocodiles from the wooden docks as a boy, and often claimed they knew his scent, that they wouldn't touch him. To the locals, it sounded foolish, but harmless, until he began showing off to tourists more boldly that year. Tourism had picked up again after the floods. Prasert saw that as opportunity. On afternoons when tours docked nearby, he'd wade into the shallows, slap the water, and shout at the river to make visitors laugh. He did it for show, for pocket money, for the small thrill of being the man everyone pointed a camera at. He never carried a stick, never watched the currents. The more people warned him, the more fearless he pretended to be. That afternoon, the river looked swollen and slow. Mud and driftwood floated near the banks, and the air smelled of decay from leaves and stagnant water. The sun had broken through gray clouds, turning the surface gold in places and black in others. The river widened toward the mangrove line, where tall reeds hid what moved beneath. The Siamese crocodile is smaller than the saltwater species, but equally lethal. Males can reach 12 feet and weigh nearly 1,000 pounds. They are ambush hunters, relying on patience, motionless until a splash or vibration signals prey. Their bite force exceeds 3,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone in a single snap. Locals had seen them resurface after floods, drifting near villages where fish were abundant. They usually avoided people, unless provoked. Prasert had been told about recent sightings near the pier. 2 fishermen claimed to have seen a large croc moving upriver the previous night, its eyes reflecting orange in their flashlight beam. Others urged him not to go near the water, especially while it was still muddy. But the warnings made his audience larger. That day, a group of German tourists had gathered, laughing and filming as he stood knee-deep, slapping the surface with his hand. His friends, drinking nearby, called out for him to call the croc. He grinned, waved at the cameras, and kept hitting the water harder. The river rippled several yards away. A small V-shaped wake appeared, gliding toward him with slow precision. The tourists murmured, unsure if it was real. Prasert turned toward it, squinting against the glare, then laughed and splashed again. The ripple stopped, then vanished. For a moment, everything went silent except for the hum of insects. Then the water exploded. A dark, massive shape erupted from the surface, jaws wide, striking his torso. The impact was like a crack of wood splitting. Witnesses said his scream cut through the still air, short, sharp, then choked. The crocodile twisted violently, dragging him sideways into the deeper water. He tried to grab the muddy bank, leaving streaks in the clay, but the croc's body rolled, pulling him under in seconds. The tourists stumbled backward, some dropping their phones, others shouting in disbelief. His friends ran to the edge, throwing sticks, shouting his name, but the water boiled with mud and foam before going completely still. Only a faint red swirl spread downstream. The river went quiet after the attack. The tourists stood frozen, still recording, unsure if it was over. Then, to everyone's shock, the water stirred once more. 2 men from the pier waded in with poles, striking until they saw movement. The crocodile slipped away downstream, leaving Prasert floating face down near the reeds. They pulled him to shore, his legs torn deeply and one arm nearly severed. Someone called the Rangers, while others tried to wrap his wounds with shirts. He was still breathing when they carried him to the pickup that served as an ambulance. By the time they reached the district hospital, 40 minutes later, he had lost too much blood. Doctors said the lacerations to his thigh and abdomen were catastrophic. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The riverbank where he had performed his shows was closed for weeks. Locals placed a bamboo cross near the spot, tied with colored cloth. Tour boats still pass that bend, but guides lower their voices when they do. They say the water there feels heavier now, silent, as if waiting. The noise from that river faded, but the lesson didn't. A few months later and 2,000 miles away, another crowd gathered near rising water, this time not to laugh, but to watch. It was October 29, 2017, in Galle, a coastal city in southern Sri Lanka, where the rain had not stopped for 7 days. The streets had become shallow rivers, flowing around parked cars and storefronts. People walked barefoot through ankle-deep water, carrying bags above their heads and laughing at the strangeness of it. The flood had turned the familiar into something uncertain. Beneath the surface, the drainage canals that connected to the main lagoon were swollen and dark, and something alive had followed the current inland. Harsha Samarasinghe, 29, worked as a motorbike courier for a small logistics company. He was known around the neighborhood as quick, helpful, and always joking. When the rains came, his work slowed down. He spent his days near the local grocery, helping people push stalled bikes through the water for tips and entertainment. He liked attention, posting short clips online of odd things he saw during deliveries. It wasn't about fame, just the fun of it. He lived with his younger brother in a 2-room house near the canal, and often told him that the floods made life interesting. That afternoon, as the water level rose again, word spread that a crocodile had drifted into the residential area. A few neighbors saw it first, a large shape resting in front of a small grocery, half covered in mud. By the time Harsha arrived, 10 or 12 people had gathered around it. Some stood on the steps with their phones out, others shouted for it to move. The animal lay still, its body blending with the brown water. To most, it looked harmless, tired, maybe stranded. Harsha grinned, waded closer, and lifted his phone to start a live stream. The flooded street shimmered in the weak afternoon light. Plastic wrappers floated by. Somewhere, a dog barked. The air smelled of diesel and rot. The water was waist-deep in the center, hiding gutters and small drainage ditches. The crocodile's tail curved slightly, as if caught in a current. But its eyes didn't move. Rain began to fall again. Light, steady drops breaking the surface. Saltwater crocodiles are common in Sri Lanka's southern wetlands. Males can grow beyond 15 feet, weighing over 1,000 pounds. During heavy floods, they often travel inland through canals, hunting stray dogs or livestock. They can hold still for hours, their camouflage nearly perfect in muddy water. Despite their bulk, they can launch forward faster than a person can react, up to 20 miles per hour in short bursts. Most locals know to avoid them, but every flood brings new encounters, and curiosity often wins. The local police had issued a radio warning that morning, advising residents to stay away from flooded canals and ditches. Some people said they heard one had been seen earlier near the fish market. Harsha likely heard these same reports, but to him, this was something rare, something to film. He said it looked dead. Others said it was just resting. No one wanted to get close enough to find out. When he picked up a broken broom handle floating nearby, laughter rose from the crowd. He used it to poke at the animal's tail while still holding his phone in his other hand. The crocodile didn't move at first. The stick hit its side. Then again, people called for him to stop, but he took a step closer to get a better shot. The moment his foot sank into the deeper part of the street, the surface broke. The crocodile's head shot forward in a single violent surge, jaws clamping onto his lower leg. The sound was dull, heavy, like wood cracking underwater. Harsha fell sideways, screaming as the phone slipped from his hand into the water. Panic broke out. Several men shouted and ran, splashing through the flood. The crocodile pulled backward toward the deeper ditch beside the grocery, its entire body twisting with the force of a roll. Harsha grabbed a metal gate post, trying to anchor himself, but the croc rolled again, spinning him under. The water erupted with mud and foam, then turned red. One man threw a rock, another hit the water with a pole, but it made no difference. Within seconds, the thrashing stopped. Only the rain and the murmur of running water filled the silence. A few people stayed frozen on the steps, waiting for movement. The gate Harsha had grabbed rattled slightly from the current. His phone floated up a few minutes later, screen cracked but still recording, showing only the surface of the muddy water and the sound of distant shouting. By the time rescuers arrived an hour later, the water had risen higher, carrying debris from the ditch downstream. At dawn, officials drained the section of flooded street, revealing tangled debris, branches, plastic bags, and one black sneaker wedged beneath a metal grate. They found no body. The municipality placed plastic barricades and a warning sign where it happened, but when the next monsoon came, the barriers drifted away with the rain. Locals still mention it when the streets flood again. How easy it is to mistake stillness for safety when the river finds its way back home. Some people tempt danger for attention. Others go looking for it out of anger. In Kenya, one man decided the river owed him a debt, and he meant to collect it. It was August 21st, 2015, along the lower banks of the Tana River in eastern Kenya, where the water ran low and thick after a dry spell. The air was heavy with heat, and the mud at the edges had begun to crack. It was quiet except for the drone of insects and the occasional ripple where fish broke the surface. The stillness of that evening hid the violence waiting beneath. Joseph Mwangi, 44, had lived his whole life in a settlement on the river's edge. He farmed maize and kept a few animals, enough to feed his family through most seasons. He was known as practical and steady, not reckless. But the loss of 2 goats and a calf to a crocodile over the past month had unsettled him. It wasn't just the loss, it was the helplessness of watching his work vanish overnight. For a man who had lived beside the river his whole life, it felt like an insult. He spoke often about the animal that took his stock, describing it as large, marked with a scar near its tail. No one else had seen it clearly. Villagers warned him to leave it alone and let the rangers handle it, but no one came. The attacks continued. He became convinced he knew the crocodile's pattern, surfacing near dusk when livestock came to drink. He stopped sleeping well, waiting each night for the sounds of splashing. When a neighbor once joked that he should finish it, Joseph took the remark as a challenge. He built a crude spear from a steel rod and wrapped its end with wire for grip. On that Friday evening, he told his wife he was checking his traps. Instead, he went to the riverbank. The Tana that night looked deceptively calm. The last light of the sun turned it copper-brown, and small whirlpools formed where the current met the reeds. Birds perched in the acacia trees, motionless, watching. The air carried the smell of algae and old mud. Every step Joseph took left a print in the wet ground that filled instantly with water. From where he crouched, the opposite bank was barely visible, a dark shape in the fading light. Crocodiles are territorial and can remain in the same stretch of river for decades. Males in this region can reach up to 16 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their eyes and nostrils sit high on their heads, allowing them to stay submerged with only the surface visible. At dusk, their vision sharpens while human sight weakens. They hunt by ambush, drawn by vibrations rather than sight. Local rangers often say that by the time you see one, it's already too close. Joseph ignored those warnings. He believed the water near his property was shallow, and that the crocodile would have to surface to strike. He walked barefoot for silence, carrying the spear in both hands. He waited for movement, for any ripple. The frogs had stopped croaking, something he noticed but didn't interpret as danger. He saw the surface stir just beyond a cluster of reeds, and his breathing slowed. He raised the spear, both hands gripping it tightly. What happened next was later pieced together from the marks found along the bank and the account of the man who had followed him at a distance. He threw it with all his strength. The splash was sharp and loud. A second later, the water erupted. The crocodile surged upward, jaws wide, its weight displacing the mud like a collapsing wall. In a single motion, the animal lunged again, hitting him mid-torso and forcing him backward into the shallows. He fell hard, his heel sliding through the mud. He tried to reach the spear, but the croc's jaws clamped around his left arm. The sound was heavy and quick, a crack followed by the rush of water. From a distance, his neighbor, who had followed out of curiosity, heard the splash and ran toward the noise. He saw the tail thrash once, then twist. Joseph was dragged sideways into deeper water. His scream carried across the river, but broke off as the crocodile rolled, turning the surface white with foam and mud. The man shouted for help, but by the time others arrived with flashlights, the water had gone still again. They searched with sticks and lanterns, wading cautiously, but found nothing. The only sign was a thin trail of bubbles that faded within minutes. The current drifted calmly again, as if nothing had happened. By morning, the river had swallowed its evidence. The neighbor found Joseph's broken spear embedded in the mud and streaks of blood along the bank. Rangers arrived later that day, following drag marks into the water. Hours downstream, they found a large crocodile resting near the bend. In its mouth were strands of torn fabric, part of Joseph's shirt. The animal was captured but not killed. It was relocated to a protected section of the river where attacks were less common. When word spread, some villagers called it a tragedy. Others said it was pride. His wife refused to go to the river or watch the retrieval. She said he had made his choice the night he carried the spear. By the next week, the marks of the struggle had vanished under new mud and footprints. The river, swollen again after fresh rain, returned to its slow, silent course, as it always did after taking something. While one man went to the water seeking revenge, another approached it for something far simpler, a rescue. But in Western Australia's floodplains, even kindness can turn fatal. It was February 18th, 2015, in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, where the Fitzroy River had broken its banks after a week of heavy rain. The morning sun glinted across flooded grasslands that stretched farther than usual, covering fence lines and turning open paddocks into shallow wetlands. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of mud and rotting vegetation. The water looked harmless, calm, still almost flat. But beneath it, the river's edge had vanished. Michael Turner, 39, worked as a farmhand on a property bordering the river. He was the kind of man people called when animals went missing, or when floodwaters stranded livestock. Neighbors said he had a steady way about him. Patient, soft-spoken, and confident around animals. He'd grown up in the region and understood its weather and rhythms. The rains didn't worry him. When the low-lying pastures filled, he helped others move cattle to higher ground, driving his old utility truck through the mud with practiced ease. That week, a small blue heeler, one of the station dogs, wandered off during a storm. By mid-morning, the animal was visible again, marooned on a grassy rise a few hundred feet across the floodplain. It barked and circled, stranded by the water that had crept in overnight. Michael spotted it while checking the fence line and decided to bring it back before the water rose again. His partner and a neighbor stood by the truck, watching as he grabbed a stick and started toward the dog. He told them it looked shallow, no more than knee-high, and that he'd be back in a few minutes. The plain was silent except for the soft push of water against the grass. Mosquitoes drifted in swarms, and the air carried a faint metallic scent from the wet soil. The sun was pale behind low clouds, and the horizon seemed to merge with the flooded field. Michael waded forward, each step sending slow ripples outward. His reflection broke and reformed in the brown surface. Saltwater crocodiles are known to travel far inland during the wet season. When rivers overflow, they follow the floodwater into new areas, hunting stray livestock and dogs. Males can grow beyond 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. They move with deceptive stillness, waiting under cover until vibrations signal something alive nearby. Locals know to be cautious during floods, but familiarity often dulls that sense of risk. The plain that day looked empty, but the same channels that carried fish and debris from the river could also hide predators. Michael's partner later said she felt uneasy as he walked farther out. The dog barked, tail low, shifting on its small patch of dry ground. The neighbor noticed faint ripples moving against the wind, small arcs spreading near the center of the plain. Neither spoke up, thinking it might be fish or drifting grass. Michael was about 30 yards in when the water reached his thighs. He lifted the stick, calling softly, trying to coax the dog toward him. The surface behind him suddenly rippled in a wide V-shape that closed fast. Before he could turn fully, the water erupted. A massive shape surged upward, jaws snapping around his leg with a violent splash. The impact threw him sideways, the sound heavy and final. Mud and foam sprayed into the air, then the water rolled back over itself. The dog bolted at once, sprinting toward the far side. Michael's partner screamed and ran toward the bank, but the surface ahead exploded again, this time with a twisting tail breaking through before vanishing. The motion lasted only seconds. 2 bursts, then stillness. His hat floated up and drifted toward the edge. The only sound afterward was wind moving through the reeds. They stood at the water's edge, shouting his name, scanning for movement. The floodplain gave nothing back. The surface stayed calm, dull with stirred mud, the air thick with heat. By nightfall, police and wildlife officers had arrived. They used small boats and searchlights, following drag marks that led toward a deeper drainage channel connecting to the river. The next morning, a search team found torn fabric and 1 boot tangled in reeds half a mile downstream. Tracks pressed into the mud confirmed a large crocodile, likely a male pushed inland by the flood. Days later, officers captured a 14-foot specimen near a narrowing in the channel, but they couldn't prove it was the same one. Michael's body was never found. When the rains ended weeks later, the floodplain dried and cracked in the sun. Grass regrew where the water had stood. Locals said it was the year the river walked too far inland, claiming land that wasn't meant to be its own. The dog returned on its own a few days after the search ended, covered in mud and silent, lying beside the truck where Michael had left it. Most attacks happen in open water. Rivers, floodplains, places where people expect danger to lurk. But sometimes it doesn't wait there. It creeps closer, slipping past fences and fields, settling in the calm spaces people stop fearing. In one village, it waited only a few steps from the back door. It was September 2nd, 2017, in a small village outside Palembang, Indonesia. The dry season had lingered longer than usual. The soil was cracked, and dust clung to everything. The trees, the tin roofs, even the slow-moving air. By noon, the heat shimmered above the narrow roads. Behind one of the older houses stood a shallow, concrete basin, once used for breeding fish. It hadn't held anything but rainwater for years. But in the drought, it became the only patch of damp shade left in the yard. Siti Marlena, 69, had lived there all her life. She'd raised 3 children in that house, all of whom had moved to the city long ago. Her husband had died nearly a decade earlier, and since then, she kept herself busy tending her garden and feeding stray animals. She was known in the neighborhood as generous but stubborn, a woman who preferred routine over caution. During that dry stretch, when even the birds had stopped visiting, she decided to refill the old fish basin from her well to give animals a place to drink. Neighbors often warned her that crocodiles sometimes moved through the drainage canals south of the village. They had heard of sightings near the sugar fields, and once saw one stranded by a blocked culvert, its tail caked in mud. Siti brushed those stories off. The nearest canal was more than 100 yards away, and her yard was fenced. She said if a crocodile ever reached her home, it would mean the river itself had decided to visit. That morning, she filled several buckets from the well, carrying them one by one to the basin behind her house. The water inside was cloudy, covered in a thin green film. She used an old ladle to stir it, shooing away mosquitoes. The air smelled of dry earth and stagnant water. Crickets chirped from the grass, and somewhere a rooster called weakly. It was the first time in weeks she'd seen the basin nearly full. Saltwater crocodiles are common in southern Sumatra, able to travel through narrow canals and survive in brackish or even fresh water. During droughts, they often move in search of cooler, deeper pools, settling in abandoned ponds or shaded runoff basins. Large adults, reaching up to 15 feet in length, can stay submerged for nearly an hour, moving silently through water that seems too small to hide them. Locals rarely expect them in dry conditions, which makes these encounters more dangerous. In the days before the incident, some of Siti's neighbors noticed that stray dogs had stopped drinking from the basin. One man claimed he saw faint ripples there after sunset, though the air was still. When he mentioned it to her, she laughed, saying he was seeing the wind play tricks on the surface. That morning, as she walked behind her house again with another bucket, the ground around the basin looked undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. She set the bucket down beside her and leaned over to pour water into the basin. The sound of splashing echoed sharply in the still yard. The moment the stream hit the surface, something below shifted, a swirl of mud rising to the top. Before she could react, the water broke open. A dark shape surged upward, jaws clamping around her left arm with a dull crack. The force knocked her sideways, spilling the bucket and pulling her knee against the concrete edge. She screamed once, the sound short and hoarse. The crocodile twisted immediately, dragging her towards the center of the basin. Neighbors heard the crash of metal and rushed outside, thinking a wall had collapsed. What they saw was the surface churning violently, muddy water spilling over the rim. Her legs kicked once above the surface before disappearing. The entire struggle lasted less than 10 seconds. When the water stilled, the basin looked as calm as before, except for the spilled bucket and a faint red tint near the center. One neighbor, a retired mechanic, ran to the edge with a wooden pole and tried to stir the water, but it was too deep to see the bottom. Others shouted for help and brought ropes, but no one dared step close. The basin was only about 8 feet across, but deep enough to hide a full-grown animal. By the time the police and local wildlife officers arrived, it was late afternoon. The water was drained using a portable pump, revealing the cracked concrete floor covered in silt. In the corner, beneath a layer of mud, they found the crocodile, nearly 12 feet long, still gripping part of City's clothing in its teeth. Her body was removed the next morning. Officials believed the animal had entered her yard through a narrow drainage ditch behind the property, likely following the smell of water during the drought. It had remained trapped in the basin after feeding. The crocodile was euthanized on site. Her small house was later sealed, its back gate chained to prevent access. Weeks later, when the rains finally came, the basin filled again. No one touched it. The neighbors said that birds landed on the fence but never on the water. They avoided that side of the yard altogether. And when asked why, one man said the water there never felt empty anymore. It was August 14th, 2016, and the golden grasslands of Masai Mara National Reserve stretched endlessly under the blazing Kenyan sun. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the savanna as acacia trees dotted the landscape like ancient sentinels watching over one of Africa's most spectacular wildlife sanctuaries. Patricia Thornfield, known to everyone as Patty, sat in the back of an open-air safari vehicle beside her new husband James, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the magnificent scenery around them. At 27, the dental hygienist from Portland had dreamed of this moment for years, saving every penny from her modest salary to afford this luxury honeymoon safari that represented the adventure of a lifetime. Patty had always been captivated by African wildlife documentaries, spending countless evenings watching National Geographic specials and dreaming of the day she would witness these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat. Her friends knew her as someone with an adventurous spirit who was always ready to try something new, though her actual outdoor experience was limited to weekend camping trips in the Oregon mountains. The couple had been married just 2 weeks earlier, in a small ceremony attended by family and close friends. This safari represented not just their honeymoon, but the fulfillment of a shared dream that had brought them together 3 years earlier when they met at a wildlife photography exhibition in downtown Portland. Their guide, a seasoned Maasai ranger named Joseph, had positioned their vehicle about 30 yards from a pride of lions that had emerged from the tall grass to rest in the shade of a large acacia tree. The pride consisted of 2 adult females, several cubs, and a magnificent male whose impressive mane caught the golden light of the setting sun. African lions are apex predators that live in complex social structures called prides, typically consisting of related females, their offspring, and 1 or more dominant males. Adult males can weigh up to 420 pounds and possess incredible strength, with powerful jaws capable of delivering bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch. Lions are naturally curious, but can become extremely aggressive when they perceive threats or unusual movements. Their hunting instincts are triggered by sudden motions, elevated positions, or anything that resembles the behavior of prey animals trying to escape. Joseph had given his standard safety briefing before departing from the lodge, emphasizing the critical importance of remaining seated and quiet during wildlife encounters. Despite these warnings, and James's gentle reminders to stay seated, Patty's excitement overcame her caution. She slowly rose from her seat in the back of the vehicle, believing that the 90-foot distance between them and the lions provided adequate safety. The moment Patty stood up, the male lion's demeanor changed completely. His head snapped toward the vehicle, his amber eyes locking onto the sudden movement and elevated silhouette that his predatory instincts immediately identified as potential prey. Without warning, the 400-pound predator exploded into motion with devastating power. His powerful hind legs propelled him across the 30 feet of open ground in 3 massive bounds, each stride covering more distance than seemed physically possible for such a large animal. The massive male landed directly on top of Patty with bone-crushing force, his weight and momentum driving her backward into the vehicle's floor with devastating impact. The lion's powerful jaws found Patty's neck with surgical precision, his 4-inch canine teeth puncturing through muscle and bone, while his bite force crushed her cervical vertebrae instantly. Joseph immediately fired warning shots from his rifle, the sharp cracks echoing across the savannah as he tried to drive the lion away. James lunged forward desperately, trying to grab his wife, but the predator's massive frame filled the entire back section of the vehicle. Patty's body went limp within seconds as the lion's devastating bite severed her spinal cord and major blood vessels. Her expensive camera fell from her hands and shattered on the vehicle's floor. The male lion maintained his grip on Patty's neck for several more seconds before Joseph's continued rifle fire finally convinced him to release his victim and leap from the vehicle. With remarkable skill, Joseph managed to start the engine and slowly reverse away from the Pride while James cradled Patty's lifeless body. The drive back to the lodge took 20 agonizing minutes, with Joseph radioing ahead for medical assistance that everyone knew would be too late. Park officials launched an immediate investigation into the incident, reviewing safety protocols and interviewing witnesses. The attacking lion was tracked and relocated to a more remote section of the reserve, as wildlife authorities determined that his behavior was a natural response to perceived prey rather than abnormal aggression. Patty's death sent shockwaves through the safari tourism industry and prompted renewed emphasis on safety briefings and passenger compliance with guide instructions. Her family struggled to understand how their daughter's dream adventure had ended in such tragedy, while James faced the devastating reality of returning home alone from what should have been the happiest trip of their lives. But Patty's tragic end was just the beginning of our journey through Africa's deadliest safari encounters. Deep in the heart of South Africa's most famous game reserve, a photographer's pursuit of the perfect shot was about to lead him into a confrontation with 6 tons of pure rage. It was March 7th, 2015, and the vast wilderness of Kruger National Park shimmered under the intense heat of the South African summer. Benjamin Okafor, known to his friends as Ben, crouched behind a cluster of mopin trees as he adjusted the settings on his professional camera equipment. The 42-year-old freelance photographer from Lagos had been tracking a legendary bull elephant known to local guides as Tusker for over 3 hours, waiting for the perfect opportunity to capture the magnificent animal in ideal lighting conditions. Ben had been working in South Africa for 6 months, building an impressive portfolio of wildlife photographs that he hoped would land him a coveted contract with National Geographic. His dedication to his craft was legendary among his peers. He would spend entire days in the bush, often ignoring basic safety protocols in his relentless pursuit of unique and dramatic images that would set his work apart from other wildlife photographers. The bull elephant he was tracking was truly spectacular, standing nearly 12 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing an estimated 6 tons. Tusker's ivory tusks were particularly impressive, each measuring over 6 feet in length and representing exactly the kind of majestic subject that could make Ben's career. The elephant had been feeding peacefully in a grove of marula trees, seemingly unaware of the photographer's presence. African elephants are the largest land mammals on Earth, with adult bulls capable of weighing up to 7 tons and standing 13 feet tall at the shoulder. They possess incredible intelligence and complex social structures, but can become extremely dangerous when threatened or during must, a period of heightened testosterone that makes males particularly aggressive. Bull elephants in must are unpredictable and will charge at perceived threats with devastating force, using their massive size and sharp tusks as weapons capable of killing lions, rhinos, or humans. Ben had noticed the telltale signs that Tusker was in must. The temporal glands on either side of his head were secreting a dark, oily substance, and his behavior showed the restlessness and aggression typical of males in this dangerous condition. However, Ben's excitement about the photographic opportunity overrode his caution, and he decided to approach closer for the intimate shots that would make his portfolio truly exceptional. Against every safety protocol he had learned during his months in the African bush, Ben left the safety of his safari vehicle and began approaching Tusker on foot. He moved carefully through the sparse vegetation, using trees and termite mounds as cover, while he closed the distance between himself and the massive elephant. Tusker detected Ben's scent long before the photographer realized he had been discovered. The elephant's trunk rose into the air, testing the wind currents and confirming the presence of a human intruder in his territory. The massive bull's ears began flapping in agitation, and his trunk curled and uncurled in the distinctive threat display that experienced guides recognized as a warning of imminent attack. Ben was completely focused on his camera settings when Tusker made his decision to eliminate the perceived threat. The 6-ton elephant charged without warning, his massive frame moving with surprising speed as he covered the distance between them in powerful, ground-shaking strides. The sound of Tusker's charge was like thunder rolling across the landscape, his massive feet pounding the earth while his trunk trumpeted a deafening warning call that echoed for miles across the savannah. Ben looked up from his camera viewfinder to see 6 tons of enraged elephant bearing down on him with unstoppable momentum. Ben dropped his camera equipment and turned to run toward his distant vehicle, but his human speed was no match for the charging elephant's powerful legs. After covering only 20 yards, Ben tripped over a fallen log and crashed to the ground, his expensive camera gear scattering across the dusty earth. Tusker reached Ben's position within seconds, his massive front feet coming down on the photographer's torso with bone-crushing force. The impact drove Ben's body into the hard-packed earth, while his ribs collapsed under the elephant's enormous weight. Ben's desperate screams were cut short as Tusker's 6-ton mass compressed his chest cavity and ruptured his internal organs. The enraged bull elephant used his massive tusks to gore Ben's already lifeless body, lifting and tossing the photographer's remains with the same ease that he might move a fallen branch. The elephant's fury continued for several more minutes as he trampled and gored Ben's body repeatedly, ensuring that the perceived threat was completely eliminated. Other tourists in nearby vehicles witnessed the horrific attack, but could only watch helplessly from a safe distance. Park rangers arrived 20 minutes after receiving radio calls about the attack, but Ben was already dead, his body barely recognizable after Tusker's prolonged assault. Remarkably, Ben's camera was found still clutched in his hand, and the final photograph on the memory card showed Tusker's charge, a haunting image that captured the last thing Ben saw before his death. Wildlife officials made the decision not to relocate or destroy Tusker, as the attack had occurred in a restricted area where Ben should not have been on foot. Ben's death devastated his family in Nigeria and sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community. His portfolio, completed posthumously, was eventually published as a tribute to his dedication and talent, though the circumstances of his death served as a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in wildlife photography. Yet even as authorities in South Africa grappled with Ben's tragic death, another experienced professional was about to make a fatal error in judgment that would cost him his life in the crocodile-infested waters of Botswana. It was June 22nd, 2017, and the Chobe River wound lazily through the heart of Chobe National Park in Botswana, its muddy waters reflecting the intense blue of the African sky. Samuel Motsepe guided his boat full of eager tourists along the riverbank, pointing out hippos wallowing in the shallows and elephants coming down to drink in the late afternoon heat. At 35, Samuel was one of the most experienced guides in the park, with 12 years of leading boat safaris along this treacherous but spectacular waterway. Samuel had been born and raised in a village just outside the park boundaries, learning about the river and its dangers from childhood. His intimate knowledge of Chobe's wildlife and his natural storytelling ability had made him a favorite among tourists, and his recent promotion to senior guide status reflected his expertise and dedication to his craft. The afternoon safari had been proceeding perfectly until Samuel noticed that their boat's engine was beginning to overheat. The temperature gauge showed dangerous levels, and he knew that continuing to run the motor could result in permanent damage that would leave them stranded in one of Africa's most dangerous waterways. Samuel made the decision to beach the boat on a small island in the middle of the river, planning to let the engine cool down for 30 minutes before continuing their journey back to the lodge. He assured his nervous tourists that it would be a quick stop, though several of them expressed concern about leaving the safety of the boat in an area known to be heavily populated by Nile crocodiles. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators, with large males reaching lengths of over 16 feet and weights exceeding 1,500 pounds. They are perfectly adapted ambush hunters that can remain motionless underwater for up to an hour, waiting for prey to come within striking distance. Their bite force exceeds 5,000 pounds per square inch, making them capable of crushing the bones of large mammals with ease. Crocodiles are opportunistic feeders that will attack anything that enters their territory, and they are particularly dangerous in areas where humans regularly disturb the water. Samuel waded into the knee-deep water to secure the boat's anchor, despite knowing that this section of the Chobe River was home to some of the largest crocodiles in Africa. His years of experience had made him perhaps overconfident about his ability to recognize and avoid danger. What Samuel didn't realize was that a massive 16-foot Nile crocodile had been lying motionless on the riverbed just 20 feet from where he entered the water. The ancient predator had been waiting in perfect ambush position, its prehistoric brain programmed to recognize the vibrations and disturbances that indicated potential prey entering its domain. The attack happened with lightning speed that left Samuel's tourists barely time to comprehend what they were witnessing. The massive crocodile exploded from the murky water like a prehistoric missile, its enormous jaws gaping open to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth as it launched itself at Samuel's legs. The crocodile's jaws clamped down on Samuel's thigh with devastating force, the massive teeth puncturing through muscle and bone, while the predator's bite force crushed his femur instantly. Samuel's scream of agony echoed across the water as the crocodile began its signature death roll, spinning rapidly to disorient its prey and cause maximum damage to tissue and bone. The death roll dragged Samuel underwater as the crocodile used its powerful tail and body to maintain momentum in the spinning attack. Samuel's desperate struggles created violent splashes on the surface as he fought to break free from the predator's grip, but the crocodile's hold was unbreakable. Samuel's body surfaced briefly before the crocodile pulled him under again. The massive reptile's death roll continued with mechanical precision, each rotation causing additional trauma to Samuel's already mangled leg while simultaneously drowning him in the muddy river water. The tourists in the boat screamed in horror as they watched their guide disappear beneath the churning surface, leaving only a spreading pool of blood to mark where the attack had occurred. Samuel's body surfaced one final time about 50 yards downstream, floating face down in the current before disappearing again beneath the murky water. The stranded tourists remained in their anchored boat for over 2 hours before a rescue team arrived in response to their overdue return. Park rangers conducted an extensive search of the area, but found no trace of Samuel's body, which had been carried downstream by the current. Samuel's remains were eventually recovered 3 days later, 2 miles downstream from the attack site. The condition of his body confirmed that he had been killed by a large crocodile, and the investigation revealed that he had violated park safety protocols by entering the water in a known crocodile habitat. The incident prompted immediate changes to boat safari procedures, requiring guides to use only designated landing areas with established safety measures. Samuel's death devastated his family and the local guiding community, while serving as a tragic reminder that even experienced professionals could fall victim to Africa's apex predators. However, the dangers of African wildlife extended beyond the continent's famous predators. In South Africa's rhino conservation areas, a young volunteer's dedication to protecting endangered species was about to lead her into a fatal encounter with a protective mother. It was October 3rd, 2014, and the rolling hills of Hluhluwe Imfolozi Park in South Africa basked under the warm spring sunshine. Emma Johansson, a 24-year-old veterinary student from Sweden, approached the holding pen, where a female white rhinoceros stood with her week-old calf, calf. Emma had been volunteering with the park's rhino conservation project for 4 months, and her gentle nature with the animals had made her a favorite among both the staff and the rhinos in their care. Emma had raised money through crowdfunding to cover her expenses for the 6-month volunteer program, driven by her passion for wildlife protection and her desire to gain hands-on experience with endangered species. Her work with orphaned rhino calves had been particularly successful, and she had developed a reputation for her ability to calm even the most agitated animals. The female rhino, known to the staff as Nomsa, had given birth to her calf in the semi-wild section of the park, where animals lived in large enclosures that simulated natural conditions. Emma had been assigned to conduct a routine health check on both mother and calf, a procedure she had performed dozens of times during her volunteer stint. White rhinoceros are the second largest land mammals after elephants, with adult females weighing up to 4,000 pounds and standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Despite their name, they are actually gray in color, and their massive size is matched by their surprising speed and agility. Female rhinos are normally docile animals, but they become extremely protective when caring for young calves, and will aggressively defend their offspring against any perceived threat. Their single horn can grow up to 5 feet in length and is capable of inflicting devastating wounds when used as a weapon. Emma had grown comfortable working with the rhinos over her months at the park, and she had developed what she believed was a special bond with several of the animals in the conservation program. As Emma approached Nomsa's enclosure, she noticed what appeared to be a small cut on the rhino's rear leg that needed examination. Emma entered the enclosure with her medical kit, planning to examine the wound and clean it if needed. Nomsa watched Emma's approach with apparent calm, showing none of the agitation that typically preceded aggressive behavior in rhinos. The massive female continued grazing while keeping one eye on her calf, who was nursing peacefully nearby. What Emma failed to recognize was that Nomsa's calm demeanor was actually the behavior of a protective mother assessing a potential threat to her offspring. The rhino was allowing Emma to approach while simultaneously preparing to defend her calf if the human's intentions proved hostile. Emma knelt down beside Nomsa's rear leg to get a better look at the suspected wound, bringing herself within striking distance of the massive animal's powerful legs and horn. She was completely focused on her examination when Nomsa made her decision to eliminate what she perceived as a threat to her calf. The 4,000-pound rhino spun around with surprising speed and agility, her massive horn aimed directly at Emma's torso. Emma looked up from her examination just in time to see 2 tons of muscle and bone bearing down on her with unstoppable momentum. Nomsa's horn struck Emma in the abdomen with devastating force, the sharp point puncturing through her body and lifting her off the ground like a rag doll. The rhino's incredible strength drove the horn deep into Emma's torso, causing massive internal damage to her organs and major blood vessels. Emma's scream of agony echoed across the conservation facility as Nomsa shook her massive head, the movement causing additional trauma to the horn wound. The rhino then dropped Emma to the ground and began trampling her with her massive feet, each impact crushing bones and causing further internal injuries. Other volunteers heard Emma's screams and came running to the enclosure, but they could only watch in horror as Nomsa continued her assault on the young woman's broken body. Emma's movements ceased within minutes as massive blood loss and internal trauma overwhelmed her system. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 20 minutes and immediately airlifted Emma to a trauma center in Durban, but her injuries were too severe to survive. She died during surgery from massive internal bleeding caused by the rhino's horn and the subsequent trampling. The investigation revealed that Emma had violated safety protocols by entering the enclosure alone and approaching too closely to a mother with a young calf. Nomsa and her offspring were relocated to a more remote section of the park, and volunteer procedures were revised to require trained ranger accompaniment during all animal interactions. Emma's death shocked the international conservation community and highlighted the inherent dangers of working with large wildlife, even in controlled environments. Her family established a scholarship fund in her memory to support other young people pursuing careers in wildlife conservation. But even as the conservation world mourned Emma's loss, another tragedy was already unfolding in Tanzania, where a businessman's midlife crisis would lead him into a deadly encounter with one of Africa's most dangerous animals. It was December 11th, 2013, and the endless plains of the Serengeti stretched to the horizon under the brilliant blue Tanzanian sky. Richard Castellano, known to his friends as Rick, walked nervously behind his guide as they tracked a herd of Cape buffalo through the tall grass. At 51, the successful construction company owner from Chicago was on his first African safari, having booked an expensive walking tour as part of his response to a recent divorce and midlife crisis. Rick had built his construction business from nothing, working 18-hour days for 20 years to create a company that employed over 200 people. His recent divorce had left him questioning his priorities and searching for adventures that would prove he was still capable of handling challenges beyond the boardroom. The walking safari took place on a private concession bordering the Serengeti, one of the few areas where tourists were permitted to explore the bush on foot under armed supervision. For Rick, it represented the ultimate test of his courage and stamina, a chance to experience Africa's wildlife up close rather than from the safety of a vehicle. He had dismissed his guide's safety briefings as overcautious, convinced that his years of business success had prepared him for any challenge the African bush might present. Cape buffalo are considered one of Africa's Big Five most dangerous animals, with adult bulls weighing up to 1,900 pounds and possessing a temperament that makes them unpredictable and aggressive. They have excellent hearing and eyesight and will charge at perceived threats with devastating force. Their massive horns form a solid shield across the top of their heads called a boss, and they use these weapons to gore and trample anything they consider a threat. Cape buffalo are responsible for more hunter deaths in Africa than any other animal, and they have been known to circle back and ambush humans who have wounded them. The walking tour had been proceeding cautiously for 2 hours when the group encountered a lone bull buffalo grazing in a clearing about 100 yards ahead. The guide, an experienced tracker named Joseph, immediately signaled for the group to stop and remain absolutely still while he assessed the situation. Joseph recognized the danger immediately. Lone buffalo bulls were often old males that had been expelled from the herd and were typically more aggressive and unpredictable than animals in groups. He began slowly backing the group away from the area, planning to circle around the buffalo and continue their walk in a safer direction. Rick, however, saw the encounter as an opportunity to prove his courage to the other tourists in the group. Against Joseph's urgent whispered instructions, Rick began moving toward the buffalo, pulling out his camera to capture what he believed would be an impressive photograph. The buffalo had been aware of the human group's presence from the moment they entered the clearing, but had shown no immediate signs of aggression. What Rick failed to understand was that the buffalo's apparent calm was actually the behavior of a predator assessing potential threats and planning his response. When Rick moved within 20 feet of the massive animal, the buffalo made his decision to attack. The bull's head snapped up from his grazing, his small eyes focusing on Rick with deadly intensity as his muscles tensed for the charge that would follow. The Cape buffalo's attack came with explosive speed that caught Rick completely off guard. The massive bull covered the 20 feet between them in 3 powerful strides, his 1,500-pound frame moving with surprising agility as he bore down on his target. Rick tried to turn and run, but his out-of-shape body was no match for the buffalo's incredible speed and power. The bull's massive head struck Rick in the back with bone-crushing force, sending him sprawling face-first into the dusty ground while his camera flew from his hands. The buffalo's assault was methodical and devastating. His massive hooves trampled Rick's prone body, while his sharp horns gored repeatedly into his victim's torso and limbs. Each impact caused additional trauma, as the bull's enormous weight and strength turned Rick's body into a broken, bleeding mass. Joseph fired warning shots from his rifle, the sharp cracks echoing across the savannah as he tried to drive the enraged buffalo away from his client. The other tourists screamed in terror as they witnessed the graphic violence, several of them becoming physically ill from the sight of Rick's mangled body. The buffalo continued his assault for several several more minutes, his fury driving him to ensure that the perceived threat was completely eliminated. Rick's desperate screams had ceased within the first minute of the attack, but the bull continued trampling and goring his lifeless body with mechanical precision. Eventually, Joseph's continued rifle fire convinced the buffalo to abandon his attack and retreat into the tall grass. Rick died from massive trauma before the medical evacuation helicopter could reach their remote location. His body bore the unmistakable marks of a buffalo attack: multiple gore wounds, crushed bones, and internal injuries that no human could survive. The investigation revealed that Rick had violated every safety protocol by approaching the buffalo against his guide's explicit instructions. The attacking bull was tracked by park rangers but left undisturbed, as the attack had occurred in his natural territory due to human error rather than abnormal animal behavior. Rick's death sent shockwaves through his family and business community in Chicago, while serving as a tragic reminder that Africa's wildlife demanded respect and caution from even the most successful and confident visitors. It was November 8, 2015. And the humid Miami evening air hung thick around the modest suburban home where Marcus Rodriguez ran his exotic snake breeding operation. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the converted garage that housed his collection of massive Burmese pythons. Inside the climate-controlled space, the soft hum of heating lamps mixed with the occasional rustle of scales against glass. This was Marcus's world, a carefully maintained ecosystem of predators that had become both his passion and his livelihood. At 29, Marcus had been working with exotic snakes for 7 years, building a reputation among collectors for breeding some of the largest and most impressive Burmese pythons in South Florida. His operation had once been thriving, with custom-built enclosures lining the walls and a steady stream of buyers willing to pay premium prices for his specimens. But recent months had been brutal. A messy divorce had drained his savings, legal fees had piled up, and the exotic pet market had grown increasingly competitive. To cut costs, Marcus had started working alone, dismissing the assistant who used to help him handle the larger snakes during feeding time. The garage held 6 massive pythons, but none compared to Medusa, his prized 18-foot female that had become the centerpiece of his breeding program. She was a magnificent specimen, her golden and brown patterns perfectly defined, her body thick with muscle that rippled beneath her scales. At nearly 200 pounds, she was one of the largest Burmese pythons in private hands, and Marcus had turned down multiple offers from collectors who wanted to buy her. But maintaining such a massive snake was expensive, and with money tight, he had been stretching feeding schedules longer than he should have. Burmese pythons are among the largest snakes in the world, capable of reaching lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, they are powerful constrictors that kill their prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around victims and squeezing with tremendous force, up to 90 pounds of pressure per square inch. When hungry, they become increasingly aggressive and opportunistic, striking at anything that moves within range. Their feeding response is triggered by warmth and movement, and once activated, they attack with lightning speed and devastating power. That evening, Marcus entered Medusa's enclosure carrying a dead pig, her first substantial meal in 3 weeks. Financial pressures had forced him to reduce feeding frequency, and he knew she was desperately hungry. The massive python was coiled in the corner of her enclosure, her head raised and alert, tongue flicking rapidly as she sensed the approaching food. Marcus should have used his handling tools, the long hooks and tubes designed to keep handlers at safe distances from large constrictors. Instead, he approached directly, the pig slung over his shoulder, wanting to get the feeding done quickly. Medusa's strike was instantaneous and devastating. Instead of targeting the pig, the starving python launched herself at Marcus, her massive head slamming into his chest with bone-crushing force. Her jaws clamped around his torso as her body began to coil around him with terrifying speed. Marcus dropped the pig and tried to pull away, but 200 pounds of muscle was already wrapping around his ribcage and neck. The python's coils tightened with each breath he took, her powerful muscles contracting in the ancient rhythm of constriction. The pressure was immense and unrelenting. Marcus's ribs began to crack under the strain as Medusa's body wound around him like a living vice. Each time he exhaled, the coils tightened further, preventing him from drawing another full breath. His struggles only triggered the snake's instincts to squeeze harder, her muscles responding to his movements with increased pressure. The constriction compressed his chest cavity, crushing his lungs and heart, while simultaneously cutting off blood flow to his brain. Within minutes, Marcus's movements became weaker, then stopped entirely. Medusa maintained her grip for nearly an hour after he died, her body still coiled around his lifeless form in the dim light of the enclosure. It wasn't until the following afternoon that a concerned neighbor, who hadn't seen Marcus all day, called police for a welfare check. Officers discovered his body still wrapped in the python's deadly embrace, the massive snake showing no signs of releasing her grip. The Miami-Dade Police Department's investigation ruled the death accidental, citing improper handling procedures and the victim's decision to work alone with a dangerously large snake. Animal control officers removed all 6 pythons from the property, with Medusa being relocated to a licensed facility. The incident prompted new regulations for exotic pet dealers in Florida, requiring safety protocols and backup personnel when handling large constrictors. Marcus's death sent shockwaves through the exotic pet community, where he had been well known and respected. His funeral was attended by dozens of fellow breeders and collectors, who remembered him as passionate but increasingly reckless in his final months. The financial pressures that led to his fatal mistake became a cautionary tale whispered among handlers who understood how easily desperation could override decades of experience. But Marcus wasn't the only expert who underestimated a giant snake. Dr. Mei Chen's research in the Amazon rainforest brought her face to face with an even larger predator. It was June 14, 2017, and the Amazon rainforest of Peru pulsed with life in the oppressive afternoon heat. Deep in the remote Pacaya Samiria National Reserve, where the canopy blocked most sunlight and the air hung thick with moisture, Dr. Mei Chen moved carefully along a muddy riverbank. The sounds of the jungle surrounded her, the distant calls of howler monkeys, the splash of caimans in the water, and the constant buzz of insects. This was exactly where she wanted to be, alone in one of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems, tracking the behavior patterns of South America's apex serpent predator. At 35, May was a respected herpetologist from UC Berkeley who had dedicated her career to studying dangerous snakes in their natural habitats. She had spent 8 years researching venomous and constrictor species across South America, publishing papers that had advanced the scientific understanding of anaconda behavior. Her colleagues knew her as fearless, sometimes to a fault, willing to take risks that other researchers avoided. She preferred working alone, believing that human presence altered snake behavior, and had developed techniques for approaching and documenting these massive predators that few others would attempt. This expedition was part of a 3-month study funded by the National Geographic Society, focusing on green anaconda hunting patterns and territorial behavior. May had been in the field for 6 weeks, documenting several smaller anacondas, but she was hoping to encounter one of the true giants, a mature female that could reach lengths over 20 feet. Green anacondas are the heaviest snakes in the world, with large females capable of weighing over 400 pounds and reaching lengths of 25 feet or more. They are semi-aquatic constrictors that prefer slow-moving rivers and swamps, where they hunt caimans, capybaras, and other large prey. Unlike their smaller cousins, green anacondas are incredibly powerful swimmers and can remain submerged for up to 10 minutes while stalking prey. When threatened, they become extremely aggressive, using their massive size and strength to overpower anything they perceive as a threat. That afternoon, May discovered what she had been searching for: a massive female green anaconda sunning herself on a fallen log near the water's edge. The snake was enormous, easily 20 feet long and thick as a telephone pole. Her dark green body marked with distinctive black oval patterns. May estimated her weight at over 300 pounds, making this one of the largest anacondas she had ever encountered in the wild. The attack came without warning. The massive anaconda exploded from her position with shocking speed, her enormous head striking May in the chest and knocking her backward toward the water. Before May could react, 300 pounds of muscle was wrapping around her body, the snake's coils encircling her torso and legs with crushing force. The anaconda's momentum carried both of them into the river, where the snake's natural advantage became overwhelming. In the murky water, the anaconda's grip tightened with each of May's struggles. The massive snake used her powerful body to drag May deeper, away from the shore, while simultaneously beginning the deadly process of constriction. May's research radio, clipped to her belt, transmitted her desperate calls for help, but her remote location meant no one could respond in time. The anaconda's coils compressed her chest and abdomen, making breathing impossible, while the snake's weight held her underwater. The constriction continued for nearly 20 minutes as the anaconda methodically squeezed the life from her victim. May's movements grew weaker, then stopped entirely, but the massive snake maintained her grip, instinctively ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized. May's research team began searching when she failed to return to base camp that evening. They found her equipment scattered along the riverbank 3 days later, but her body was never recovered. The Peruvian authorities conducted a brief investigation, ruling May's death an occupational hazard of field research. Her university established new safety protocols requiring researchers to work in pairs when studying large predators. May's death devastated the herpetological community, where she was remembered as a brilliant scientist whose passion for her work ultimately led to her demise. Her family established a scholarship fund for young researchers, hoping to continue her legacy while emphasizing the importance of safety in dangerous fieldwork. But not all deadly snake encounters happen in remote wilderness areas. Pastor William Hayes discovered that faith alone couldn't protect him from one of America's most venomous serpents. It was September 3, 2016, and the small Pentecostal church in rural Kentucky sat quiet in the fading evening light. The white wooden building, surrounded by rolling hills and tobacco fields, had been Pastor William Hayes's spiritual home for over 2 decades. Inside, the simple sanctuary held just 20 pews, a modest altar, and a locked room behind the pulpit where Billy kept his collection of venomous snakes. The practice of snake handling had been part of his faith since he was a young man, and at 52, he had survived countless encounters with deadly serpents that would have killed most people. Billy Hayes had been handling venomous snakes in religious services for 20 years, following a tradition rooted in a literal interpretation of biblical scripture. His congregation had once numbered over 100 faithful believers, but changing times and several close calls with snake bites had reduced his flock to fewer than 30 regular attendees. In recent months, Billy had become increasingly desperate to prove his faith and reinvigorate his ministry, taking greater risks with larger and more aggressive snakes during services. The snake room behind his altar housed 6 venomous serpents, but none commanded more respect and fear than Rex, a massive eastern diamondback rattlesnake that Billy had acquired from a dealer in Georgia. The 6-foot male was one of the largest specimens of its species, with a body as thick as a man's arm and a rattle that could be heard across the sanctuary when agitated. Rex had never been handled during services, deemed too dangerous even by Billy's standards, but lately, the pastor had been considering incorporating the massive rattler into his demonstrations of faith. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, capable of reaching lengths over 7 feet and possessing enough venom to kill multiple adult humans. Their hemotoxic venom destroys blood cells and tissue, causing massive internal bleeding, organ failure, and excruciating pain. A single bite from a large specimen can inject enough venom to kill 20 people, and their strike speed is faster than the human eye can follow. They are notoriously aggressive when threatened and will strike repeatedly if cornered. That evening, Billy had come to the church alone for what he called a private prayer session. His congregation was dwindling, His faith was being questioned by other pastors in the area, and he felt called to prove his spiritual connection through an ultimate test. He unlocked the snake room and approached Rex's enclosure, where the massive rattlesnake lay coiled in the corner, his distinctive diamond-patterned scales catching the fluorescent light. The snake's head was raised, tongue flicking rapidly, and his tail buzzed ominously as Billy opened the cage. Billy reached into the enclosure without any protective equipment, believing his faith would shield him from harm. Rex immediately went into a defensive posture, coiling tighter and raising his head higher, his rattle creating a continuous warning sound that echoed through the small room. But Billy ignored these clear signs of aggression, grasping the snake behind the head and attempting to lift him from the cage. Rex's powerful body thrashed violently, his muscles straining against Billy's grip as the pastor tried to drape the massive serpent around his shoulders. The first strike came as Billy lifted Rex from the enclosure. The snake's head twisted with lightning speed, his fangs sinking deep into Billy's forearm and injecting a massive dose of venom directly into his bloodstream. Billy cried out but didn't release his grip, believing this was a test of his faith. Rex struck again immediately, this time catching Billy's neck just below his jaw, pumping even more venom into his victim's circulatory system. The hemotoxic venom began its devastating work within seconds. Billy's arm swelled rapidly around the first bite site, the tissue turning dark as blood vessels ruptured beneath his skin. The neck bite was even more dangerous, with venom spreading quickly toward his heart and brain. Billy staggered backward, finally releasing the snake, which immediately coiled in the corner and continued its aggressive display. Billy collapsed within minutes as the massive dose of venom overwhelmed his system. His blood pressure plummeted as internal bleeding began throughout his body. His organs started shutting down one by one, first his kidneys, then his liver, as the venom destroyed tissue faster than his body could repair it. With no one present to call for emergency medical help, Billy died alone on the floor of his church, his body convulsing as the venom completed its deadly work. Rex remained coiled in the corner, his rattle still buzzing softly, when Billy's wife found his body the next morning. She had come to the church looking for her husband after he failed to return home the previous night. The massive rattlesnake was still alive and aggressive, requiring animal control officers with specialized equipment to safely remove him from the building. The Kentucky State Police investigation ruled Billy's death accidental, noting that he had violated basic safety protocols for handling venomous snakes. The church's snake handling license was revoked, and the remaining serpents were relocated to licensed facilities. Billy's death made national news, reigniting debates about religious snake handling practices and their inherent dangers. Billy's funeral drew hundreds of mourners from across the region, including many who had opposed his snake handling practices but respected his dedication to his faith. His congregation disbanded after his death, unable to continue without their charismatic leader, and the small church building was eventually sold to another denomination. But religious conviction wasn't the only thing that led people to take deadly risks with dangerous snakes. Mike Morrison's desire to impress his girlfriend with his snake handling skills proved equally fatal. It was March 27, 2014, and the afternoon sun beat down on the rural Texas property where Mike Morrison and his girlfriend Lisa kept their collection of exotic snakes. Their converted barn housed over a dozen large constrictors, from ball pythons to massive reticulated pythons, but the crown jewel of their collection was an African rock python named Titan. The 16-foot male was one of the most aggressive snakes they owned, requiring extreme caution during any interaction. Mike had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Lisa was at work, giving him the perfect opportunity to clean Titan's enclosure and document his bravery with photos that would surely impress her. At 31, Mike was a construction worker with no formal training in snake handling, but he had been keeping large pythons for 5 years and considered himself an expert. His confidence had grown with each successful interaction, and he had developed a reputation among friends for his willingness to handle snakes that others wouldn't dare approach. Mike took pride in working without protective equipment, believing that real snake handlers didn't need tools to prove their mastery. He often posted videos on social media showing himself handling his largest snakes barehanded, garnering likes and comments that fed his growing ego. The barn was sweltering in the Texas heat, and Mike could hear Titan moving restlessly in his custom-built enclosure. The massive python had been increasingly aggressive lately, striking at the glass whenever anyone approached. and Mike knew the snake was stressed by captivity. African rock pythons were notoriously difficult to keep, requiring specific temperature and humidity conditions that were hard to maintain in rural Texas. But Mike was determined to clean the enclosure today, and he wanted to get photos of himself handling the 150-pound serpent to show Lisa when she returned from work. African rock pythons are among the most aggressive python species in the world, known for their unpredictable temperament and powerful constricting ability. Native to sub-Saharan Africa, they can reach lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 200 pounds. Unlike their more docile cousins, African rock pythons retain their wild instincts even in captivity, viewing humans as potential threats or prey. Their strike speed is exceptional, and once they begin constricting, their grip is nearly impossible to break without multiple people and proper tools. Mike entered Titan's room carrying his phone to record the encounter, planning to capture footage of himself moving the massive snake by hand. The python was coiled in the far corner of his enclosure, his thick body forming tight loops, his head raised and alert. Mike could see the aggression in the snake's posture, the way his muscles tensed beneath his scales, the rapid tongue flicking, the slight swaying motion that preceded a strike. But Mike's overconfidence overrode his caution, and he approached the enclosure believing he could handle any situation that arose. The moment Mike opened the enclosure door, Titan exploded into action. The massive python launched himself across the space with shocking speed, his powerful body slamming into Mike's chest and knocking him backward against the wall. Before Mike could react, 150 pounds of muscle was wrapping around his torso, the snake's coils encircling his ribcage and arms with crushing force. Mike's phone clattered to the floor as he tried desperately to pull free, but Titan's grip only tightened with each struggle. The python's coils worked with methodical precision, each loop of his body finding purchase around Mike's chest and neck. The constricting pressure was immense, compressing Mike's lungs and preventing him from drawing breath. His ribs began to crack under the strain as Titan's muscles contracted in powerful waves, each squeeze tighter than the last. Mike's struggles grew weaker as oxygen deprivation set in, his vision blurring as the snake's deadly embrace continued. Mike's screams had alerted the neighbors, but by the time they called 911, it was too late. The constriction had crushed his chest cavity, stopping his heart and collapsing his lungs. When Lisa returned home an hour later, she found paramedics trying unsuccessfully to separate Mike's body from the python's grip. Titan had to be killed with a captive bolt gun before Mike's remains could be removed, the massive snake maintaining his death grip even after his victim had died. The investigation revealed that Mike had violated every basic safety protocol for handling large constrictors. Texas authorities removed all the snakes from the property, and several were found to be illegally obtained. Lisa was charged with multiple violations of exotic animal regulations, though charges were later reduced due to her cooperation with investigators. Mike's death sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic pet ownership in Texas. His funeral was attended by dozens of friends and co-workers who remembered him as fearless but increasingly reckless in his final months. The construction company where he worked established a safety fund in his memory, emphasizing the importance of proper training and equipment in dangerous situations. But even professional wildlife photographers weren't immune to the deadly allure of getting too close to giant snakes. David Thompson's quest for the perfect shot in the Florida Everglades would cost him everything. It was August 11, 2013, and the Florida Everglades shimmered under the brutal summer sun, a vast expanse of sawgrass and cypress swamps that stretched to the horizon. Deep in the remote backcountry of Everglades National Park, where tourists rarely ventured and cell phone signals disappeared, freelance wildlife photographer David Thompson moved carefully along an abandoned trail. The air was thick with humidity and the buzz of mosquitoes, while the distant splash of alligators and the calls of wading birds created the soundtrack of America's most dangerous wilderness. At 38, David had built a reputation for capturing images that other photographers wouldn't attempt, getting impossibly close to dangerous wildlife through a combination of patience, skill, and calculated risk-taking. He had been documenting the invasive Burmese python problem in the Everglades for National Geographic, spending weeks alone in the swamps to photograph these massive Asian snakes that were devastating the native ecosystem. His work had already produced several award-winning images, but David was always pushing for something more dramatic, more intimate, more dangerous. The Everglades python invasion had reached crisis levels by 2013, with tens of thousands of the massive constrictors established throughout South Florida. These snakes, originally released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, had found perfect conditions in the subtropical swamps, growing to enormous sizes and reproducing rapidly. David's assignment was to document their impact on native wildlife, but he had become obsessed with capturing the perfect portrait of one of the true giants, a mature female that could exceed 18 feet in length. Burmese pythons in the Everglades often grow larger than their wild Asian counterparts, with unlimited prey and no natural predators to control their growth. Females can reach lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 200 pounds, making them apex predators capable of killing alligators, deer, and even panthers. They are ambush hunters that rely on stealth and explosive striking power, remaining motionless for hours before attacking with lightning speed. Their heat-sensing abilities allow them to detect warm-blooded prey from considerable distances, and their constricting power can crush bones and stop hearts within minutes. That morning, David discovered what he had been searching for: a massive female Burmese python sunning herself on a remote trail deep in the park's interior. The snake was enormous, easily 15 feet long and thick as a telephone pole, her golden and brown patterns perfectly defined in the dappled sunlight. She appeared sluggish from the heat, her massive head resting on her coils, while her body stretched across the narrow path. David estimated her weight at nearly 180 pounds, making this one of the largest pythons he had encountered during months of fieldwork. David approached slowly, his camera equipment ready, believing the snake was too lethargic from the heat to pose any immediate threat. He had photographed dozens of large pythons during his career and felt confident in his ability to read their behavior and maintain safe distances. But as he moved closer, positioning himself for the intimate portrait he envisioned, he failed to recognize the subtle signs of alertness: the slight lifting of the snake's head, the way her tongue flicked more rapidly, the almost imperceptible tensing of muscles beneath her scales. The attack was swift and devastating. The massive python struck with explosive force, her head covering the distance between them faster than David could react. Her powerful jaws clamped around his thigh as her body began wrapping around his legs and torso with crushing strength. David's camera flew from his hands as he was pulled to the ground, 180 pounds of muscle coiling around him with methodical precision. The python's grip tightened with each of David's struggles, her powerful coils compressing his chest and abdomen, while simultaneously dragging him off the trail into dense vegetation. David's cries for help echoed through the empty swamp, but his remote location meant no one could hear his desperate calls. The snake's constricting pressure increased steadily, crushing his ribs and preventing him from drawing breath as she pulled him deeper into the undergrowth. Within minutes, David's movements ceased as the python's deadly embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The massive snake maintained her grip for over an hour, ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized before beginning the slow process of consumption. Over the following days, the python methodically swallowed David's body entirely, her elastic jaws and expandable throat allowing her to consume prey much larger than her head. Park rangers began searching when David failed to check in at his scheduled time 3 days later. They found his camera equipment scattered along the remote trail, the memory cards revealing his final photographs of the massive python. But despite extensive searches involving helicopters and tracking dogs, David's body was never recovered. The python had likely consumed him completely and retreated deeper into the vast swamp, leaving no trace of her victim. The National Park Service investigation concluded that David had violated park safety protocols by working alone in remote areas and approaching dangerous wildlife too closely. New regulations were implemented requiring photographers to work with guides when documenting large predators, and warning signs were posted throughout python habitat areas. David's disappearance sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community, where he was remembered as talented but increasingly reckless in his pursuit of dramatic images. His final photographs were published posthumously, serving as both a tribute to his skill and a warning about the dangers of getting too close to apex predators. It was August 4th, 2017. The Florida sun was beating down mercilessly on Jensen Beach as families sought refuge in the cooling embrace of the sea. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, dotted with colorful umbrellas and the laughter of children building sandcastles. For the Ruiz family, this was meant to be a celebration, their first beach vacation since Emily's father had returned from his military deployment overseas. 9-year-old Emily Ruiz stood at the water's edge. The shy girl from Orlando had always been fascinated by marine life, spending countless hours sketching dolphins and whales in her worn sketchbook. Her parents mentioned that she was extremely happy that day, finally experiencing the ocean she had only seen in pictures and documentaries. The Ruiz family had chosen a quieter section of Jensen Beach, away from the crowded main area with its vigilant lifeguards and safety equipment. Emily's parents and extended family were busy setting up their beach camp, arranging chairs and preparing lunch on a portable grill. The adults were distracted by conversation and the logistics of managing a large family gathering. Their attention divided between unpacking coolers and applying sunscreen to squirming children. Emily's 15-year-old cousin, Maria, had been tasked with watching the younger children near the water. As the tide receded, it revealed a shallow sandbar extending about 50 feet from shore, a perfect playground for the kids to splash and explore. Emily waded out confidently in her bright pink swimsuit. Around noon, as the sun reached its peak intensity, Emily spotted something that seemingly excited her: a dark triangular fin cut through the water, moving parallel to the shore in the deeper channel beyond the sandbar. Emily pointed toward the approaching fin, calling out to her cousin, thinking it was a dolphin she had spotted. Maria seemed uncertain about what she was seeing, but not wanting to dampen Emily's enthusiasm. The fin disappeared beneath the surface, then reappeared closer to shore. Emily began wading deeper, her small legs carrying her toward what she believed was a friendly dolphin. The water rose from her ankles to her knees, then to her waist, as she moved beyond the safety of the sandbar. Her cousin called after her with growing concern, but Emily was transfixed by the possibility of encountering the marine animal she had dreamed about. A lifeguard stationed at the main beach area, nearly a quarter-mile south, noticed the distinctive fin pattern through his binoculars and immediately recognized that it was a black-tip shark. He blew his whistle frantically and began running north along the beach, but the distance was too great, and the warning came too late. Blacktip sharks are among the most common species found along Florida's coast, growing up to 8 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds. These powerful hunters are equipped with razor-sharp teeth designed to slice through flesh and bone with surgical precision. Their streamlined bodies can propel them through water at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour, making them formidable ambush predators. Most dangerously, blacktips are known for their aggressive feeding behavior in shallow water, often mistaking splashing humans for their preferred prey of small fish and rays. The blacktip shark struck from below, its powerful jaws clamping down on Emily's upper thigh with devastating force. The impact drove her underwater momentarily, the clear water around her instantly turning red as the shark's serrated teeth tore through muscle and bone. Emily resurfaced screaming, her small body thrashing in panic and pain as the shark maintained its grip. Then the predator shook its head violently, a behavior designed to tear chunks of flesh from larger prey. Maria's screams pierced the air as she witnessed the horrific scene unfolding just yards away. Several beachgoers who had been enjoying the afternoon sun immediately recognized the emergency and rushed into the water, while some dialed 911. Their splashing and shouting managed to confuse the shark momentarily, causing it to release its initial grip. But as Emily struggled toward shore, weakened by blood loss and shock, the black tip struck again. This time its jaws found her lower abdomen, inflicting deadly wounds. An off-duty emergency medical technician who had been relaxing with his family immediately took charge of the rescue effort. He and several other adults managed to pull Emily from the water and onto the beach, where he attempted to control the massive bleeding using beach towels and his emergency training. Emily's small body had already begun showing signs of severe shock, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing rapid and shallow. The paramedic crew arrived within 8 minutes of the emergency call, but despite their advanced life support efforts during transport to the hospital, Emily's injuries were too severe. The combination of massive blood loss, tissue damage, and traumatic shock had overwhelmed her small body's ability to survive. Emily Ruiz was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital, becoming another tragic statistic in the ongoing conflict between humans and the ocean's apex predators. The aftermath brought renewed warnings about black-tip shark activity along Jensen Beach, with Martin County Ocean Rescue posting temporary advisory signs and increasing patrols over the following weekend. However, no official beach closure was implemented, and the area remained open to swimmers. Emily's funeral was held privately in Orlando 5 days later, attended only by close relatives at a small church service. The family declined interviews, and local authorities respected their wishes by withholding specific details from press releases. And a year after this child mistook curiosity for safety in Florida's shallows, another calm morning unfolded off Oahu's north shore, where a seasoned diver met a brutal end in open water at the jaws of a 14-foot tiger shark. It was October 16, 2016, and the waters off Oahu's north shore appeared deceptively calm. By sunrise, the wind was still, visibility stretched beyond 50 feet, and there had been no shark sightings in weeks. For 3 local divers preparing for their morning hunt, danger seemed impossibly distant. Nathan Kipa, a 26-year-old ventilation technician from Honolulu, was known for his meticulous nature both on land and in the water. He had discovered spearfishing in his teens, initially for sustenance, later for the discipline it demanded. His dive gear was always immaculate, float line perfectly coiled, spear gun maintained to perfection. Friends relied on Nathan's cautious nature, often looking to him when conditions became questionable. He rarely ventured beyond familiar reef edges, and on this particular stretch of coastline, he had logged dozens of successful dives without incident. Nathan had requested this Sunday off weeks in advance. The weather forecast promised ideal conditions, and he had committed to bringing fresh fish to his uncle's family gathering. 2 close friends, both experienced divers, accompanied him that morning. They planned to work in pairs, but understood that separation was inevitable once fish began moving through the reef. Their objective was straightforward: fill the cooler with catch and return to shore by noon. The reef at Ke'iki Point extends narrow and drops off precipitously. Beyond 165 feet, sandy slopes descend into deeper channels bordered by coral formations. That morning, crystal clear water revealed goatfish and wrasse threading through the reef structure, drawing confident divers toward deeper hunting grounds. Approximately 1 hour into their dive, Nathan signaled his intention to track a snapper moving downslope. His diving partner acknowledged with a thumbs up before surfacing to reposition. The third diver in the group, Kaleo, remained closer to the reef ledge and kept occasional visual contact with Nathan as he descended. He later recalled seeing Nathan pause mid-column, then begin his controlled descent, his body calm and balanced just beneath the surface. What Nathan likely didn't fully comprehend was the nature of the apex predator that ruled these waters. Tiger sharks patrol Hawaiian reefs with deadly efficiency, adults reaching 10 to 14 feet in length and weighing up to 1,400 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch, capable of severing limbs in a single strike. Most critically, they are drawn to areas of fish activity, particularly where blood or erratic movements might indicate wounded prey. Warnings had been posted 2 weeks earlier near Waimea Bay regarding aggressive sharks approaching divers carrying fish, but those signs had been removed after no follow-up sightings. Nathan and his companions, though experienced, had completed several calm dives in recent weeks and assumed the risk had passed. At 8:24 a.m., Callio spotted Nathan surfacing. He appeared to be adjusting equipment but had become detached from his float line. However, from roughly 90 feet away, Callio saw a tiger shark surge upward from the blue. The shark struck with sudden force, its jaws locking across Nathan's lower back and abdomen. Nathan was lifted violently out of the water, his body contorting. Callio heard a short, high-pitched scream cut off mid-breath. Then, the shark shook its head with brutal torque, easily ripping through his flesh. It pulled him under in a froth of red water and foam. Seconds later, Nathan resurfaced, thrashing. One leg hanging limp, shredded at the thigh, wetsuit peeled open along his ribs. The shark struck again from below, seizing Nathan by the shoulder and neck. Callio, as the shark, pulled him under a final time. A plume of blood and tissue rose to the surface, followed by small pieces of wetsuit. Then everything went still. Recognizing the extreme danger, Callio and the other diver abandoned their remaining equipment and swam rapidly toward shore. Lifeguards at nearby Pupukia Beach received their emergency alert at 8:41 a.m., launching rescue watercraft within 10 minutes. The Coast Guard deployed both helicopter and boat assets to join the search effort. At 9:27 a.m., aerial observers located fragments of Nathan's torn wetsuit drifting near the reef edge, along with a single detached diving fin. Despite extensive searching, no additional trace of Nathan was recovered. Authorities immediately cleared the area of watercraft while closing 3 beaches to recreational diving for 48 hours. New shark warning signs appeared across the coastline, citing an aggressive tiger shark encounter. Local news stations covered Nathan's death briefly, emphasizing the statistical rarity of such incidents. 2 days later, friends gathered for a quiet shoreline vigil near the equipment recovery site. Nathan's parents, both retired educators from Hilo, declined all interview requests. His uncle later confirmed that Nathan's employer, a small refrigeration company, covered memorial expenses and provided grief counseling for affected co-workers. Nathan vanished beneath the cobalt waters of Oahu, while thousands of miles away on a remote Australian shore, a lone tourist stepped into the surf and was obliterated by something far larger than he ever saw coming. It was December 9, 2013, and the sand at Almonte Beach stretched windswept and pristine beneath the rising southern sun. No lifeguards patrolled these waters, and no cell towers provided signal. Here, Peter Allen stood alone on the sand, preparing to enter unfamiliar surf. Peter, a 39-year-old high school history teacher from Leeds, had used his long service leave to explore Australia's southern coast by bus and rental van, tracing the shoreline from Victoria to South Australia. A self-taught nature photographer, he regularly shared wildlife images on a modest online forum and never traveled without his second-hand Nikon DSLR and GoPro camera. After 23 days in the country, camping in national parks and documenting native birds and marsupials, he had been recording voice memos for his students back home. His final audio note, saved the previous evening, mentioned one last beach hike before heading north. That morning, Peter arrived at Coffin Bay National Park and parked near a barely marked trail leading to Almonte Beach. Standard signage listed typical regulations: no fires, pack out trash, dangerous surf, but made no specific mention of sharks. He walked several hundred yards along the high tide line before stopping where dunes curved inland. No other vehicles occupied the car park. With temperatures pushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit and several hours of hiking behind him, Peter sought relief from the heat. He left his backpack beneath a tree, stripped down to his boxers, and entered the surf with the GoPro secured to his wrist. However, Peter couldn't have known that he was entering one of the world's most active great white shark habitats. Great whites can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 4,400 pounds. They possess a bite force exceeding 4,000 psi, strong enough to bite through fiberglass hulls. Unlike tropical reef sharks, great whites are ambush predators that strike from below with explosive power, often breaching fully out of the water. Though most attacks on humans are exploratory, they often prove fatal due to catastrophic trauma and blood loss. And unfortunately, the waters off South Australia's Eyre Peninsula are prime great white territory. December marks peak seasonal movement around seal rookeries, and recent drone footage near Yangi Bay, less than 5 miles away, had captured a large shark circling seals just 3 days earlier. Local fishermen had reported several fin sightings offshore in the weeks leading up to Peter's visit. People in Coffin Bay understood that Almonte Beach was unsuitable for swimming. Wildlife officers had issued internal shark risk advisories to state agencies, but no formal beach closures were in place. The park's signage hadn't been updated in over a year, and the visitor center was closed that day due to staffing shortages. Peter would have had no reason to know the water was unsafe. At 10:42 a.m., German tourists Birgit and Lucas Hoffmann were walking along the shoreline when they heard shouting. Scanning the beach, they spotted a lone man waist-deep in the surf, appearing to struggle with something in the water. He turned to wade back, but before he could take a full step, the water around him exploded. They saw it clearly. A massive shark lunged upward from the trough behind the man, striking from below with its jaws clamped across his upper legs and pelvis. Peter was hoisted almost fully out of the water. A ragged scream cut the air as the shark thrashed violently, shaking him side to side. Lucas said he saw flesh rip away from Peter's left thigh in sheets. Peter's arms beat the surface as he tried to pull away, but the shark released him only to surge again. It clamped down across his back and chest and dragged him beneath the waves in a curtain of red. Birgit later described seeing his legs kicking once, bare feet thrashing above the foam, before the water swallowed him whole. The sea frothed red. Nothing else surfaced. Only a wide slick of blood and shredded clothing remained in the shallows. The Hoffmans ran back through the dunes to reach their vehicle. They drove east until they found a signal and contacted emergency services. Park rangers arrived 30 minutes later, and the beach had returned to deceptive stillness. They found a torn backpack and pieces of nylon strapping from a camera mount, washed up near the high tide line. The water offered no trace of the victim. Helicopter surveillance flights were launched that afternoon, but failed to spot any sharks or human remains. Though uncommon, full body loss can occur when a shark makes multiple strikes or pulls the victim into deeper water. Offshore drum lines were deployed by South Australia's Primary Industries Department, but no animals were caught. They identified Peter through his belongings, and the Australian consular officers notified his family in Leeds 2 days later. His high school held a quiet memorial service, with students lighting candles in the school auditorium. In response to the incident, South Australia's Department for Environment, Water and Natural Resources issued a temporary closure of Almonte Beach and installed new multilingual shark risk signage at all major park entrances. Yet even as Peter's story served as a grim reminder of the ocean's hidden dangers, thousands of miles away in South Africa's False Bay, a man would soon discover that even the most experienced watermen are never truly safe. It was May 21st, 2015, and the early morning waters of False Bay stretched mirror-still beneath a pale sky. The air was just beginning to warm as sunrise broke over the Cape Peninsula. From shore, the sea appeared deceptively peaceful. Flat swells, no whitecaps, nothing to suggest that nearly a mile offshore, something violent was about to unfold. Thabo Mahlangu, 33, had paddled alone that morning from a familiar beach just south of Simonstown. A part-time fisheries observer and lifelong Capetonian, he divided his time between local contracting work and documenting pelagic fish patterns for regional biologists. Though he had studied marine science briefly in his 20s, he left university to support his siblings after his father's death. Those who knew him described Thabo as soft-spoken and solitary, someone who found peace at sea. He maintained detailed notes in a waterproof field book and had recently been tracking tuna activity in the bay. Solo kayaking was routine for Thabo. He preferred early, quiet launches, departing well before dawn to reach prime observation points as fish activity peaked. Though he carried a handline, he rarely fished. That morning offered ideal conditions: light wind, 61 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius, water, and visibility of 33 to 39 feet. He wore a red life vest and clipped himself to the kayak with a waist tether. His plan was simple: drift just west of Roman Rock Lighthouse, then return by mid-morning. But False Bay serves as a migratory corridor for various species, including the short-fin mako shark. Among the fastest fish in the ocean, makos can reach burst speeds over 45 miles per hour. Adults typically measure 8 to 10.5 feet and weigh up to 1,100 pounds. Typically found offshore, makos sometimes enter coastal waters while chasing tuna or mackerel. They often strike upward at speed, occasionally breaching entirely. No shark advisories had been issued that week. Tuna activity was strong, but no large predators had been sighted. The area sat outside seasonal great white hotspots, and the mild currents made it ideal for observation. Thabo had seen tuna breaching the day before and hoped to track their movement. His kayak was bright orange for visibility, and he usually kept his legs tucked inside the hull. However, at around 7:10 a.m., the crew of a handline boat was drifting a quarter-mile southeast of Roman Rock when they saw a large splash off the port bow. A deckhand raised binoculars and spotted a mako breaching, likely chasing bait fish. Moments later, they saw a kayak twist violently as something struck from below. The impact flipped the kayak instantly. Thabo surfaced on his back, still tethered by the waist, arms clawing at the overturned hull. The mako circled tight, and without warning it slammed into the underside of the kayak, ripping away nearly a foot of the hull. Thabo's right hand slipped off the hull as he kicked blindly beneath the surface. The shark reappeared again, its jaws wide open, and struck him above the hips. His scream turned shrill and short as the mako's snout broke the surface, dragging him under by the torso. Blood surged up in thick plumes, darkening the water almost instantly. The crew radioed the National Sea Rescue Institute in Simonstown, just under 2.5 miles away. A response boat launched within 12 minutes and reached the scene as blood still swirled on the surface. They recovered Thabo's body 40 meters from the impact site, badly mauled, missing both legs below the thigh, and with deep lacerations to the torso. Fisheries officers examined the damage and matched the pattern to a 9 to 10.5 foot mako shark. Forensics confirmed death by massive blood loss and traumatic injury, consistent with a high-speed predatory strike. Thabo's funeral was held in Gugulethu, attended by family, friends, and colleagues from the Department of Environmental Affairs. A short obituary misidentified the shark as a blue, later corrected by local biologists. The Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment called the attack extraordinarily rare. Patrols increased for 10 days, but no drumlines were deployed. His name was added to the National Memorial List for fallen environmental staff, while the waters of False Bay claimed another victim to the ocean's relentless predators. Thousands of miles away in Mexico's Isla Espiritu Santo, a seasoned dive instructor would soon learn that crystal-clear waters can hide a bull shark's territorial rage. It was March 3rd, 2018, and the waters off Isla Espiritu Santo sparkled beneath a clear midday sun, drawing boats and snorkelers to the rocky coastline. The surface appeared deceptively calm, just shadows beneath the reef and occasional shimmers of fish. Nothing at first glance suggested the violence that would soon erupt beneath the swells. Lorena Diaz, 30, had arrived from Mexico City 4 days earlier, seeking respite from her demanding schedule. A certified dive instructor with 10 years of experience, she had worked at dive shops in Playa del Carmen and Cozumel before returning to the capital to teach beginner pool courses. This trip represented her first break from work in months. She had booked a half-day snorkeling tour to Isla Espiritu Santo, renowned for its crystal-clear waters, playful sea lions, and shallow coral ledges. Though more comfortable in full scuba gear, Lorena was confident in open water and had previously swum alongside nurse sharks in the Caribbean. The tour group that day consisted of 6 guests and 2 guides aboard a small vessel designed for short-range coastal excursions. The boat carried minimal safety equipment. No marine radio, no trauma kit, just basic snorkeling gear. Lorena chatted easily with fellow tourists and asked one guide if she could attempt breath-hold dives during the reef stop. The guide agreed, but reminded her to avoid the deeper channels marked by floating rope barriers. The area beyond dropped precipitously to 80 to 100 feet and featured dangerous lateral currents. She acknowledged the warning before entering the water with another guest. The shoreline along Isla Espiritu Santo transitions from sandy coves to jagged underwater shelves. Near the reef, rocky fingers extend outward before plunging into open blue water. Fish movements are dense in these areas, sardines, jacks, and grunts creating constant activity that occasionally attracts larger predators. The group initially remained within the rope boundary, photographing reef fish and observing marine life. Then Lorena spotted a sudden silver flash and kicked after it. A small school of green jacks had darted just beyond the safety barrier. She followed, disappearing past the float line. But she didn't know that there are dangerous hunters patrolling these deeper waters. Bull sharks are among the ocean's most formidable coastal predators. These stocky, powerful sharks often exceed 8 feet in length and can weigh over 660 pounds. They possess a bite force exceeding 1,300 pounds per square inch, powerful enough to crush a sea turtle's shell. Most critically, they are known for their aggressive feeding behavior and territorial nature, particularly in confined or murky waters. One of the guides positioned on the boat observed Lorena surface near the rope barrier, approximately 65 feet beyond the safety zone, before she suddenly jerked upright in the water. Her arms flailed frantically as she began screaming, loud and desperate, clutching her right leg. Blood appeared almost immediately, turning the water around her a cloudy crimson. The other guest swimming nearby panicked and began shouting for help. From the deck, the guide spotted a dark shape circling just beneath the surface, moving in tight loops near Lorena's thrashing body. She attempted to swim toward safety, but her movements were uncoordinated and weakening. The other tourist, now close enough to reach her, grabbed Lorena's arm and pulled her toward the boat while kicking frantically. The shark made no second attack, but its dorsal fin surfaced briefly before vanishing into deeper water. The guides hauled both swimmers aboard by their arms. Lorena had suffered catastrophic injuries to her right calf. The bite had torn away most of the lower muscle tissue and ruptured a major blood vessel. The wound was devastating, with arterial blood soaking through towels wrapped hastily around her leg. She drifted in and out of consciousness, growing pale and shivering from shock and blood loss. With no radio aboard, one guide shouted for pressure to be maintained on the wound, while the other started the motor. The boat reached the shore 20 minutes later, but by the time they reached the hospital, Lorena was unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced her dead on arrival, citing massive blood loss as the primary cause. The bite had severed her posterior tibial artery, and based on estimated timing and distance, responders determined she had likely died within 12 to 15 minutes of being pulled from the water. No shark was targeted or captured following the incident. A joint statement from Baja's Environmental Agency and regional marine biologists confirmed the attack as consistent with defensive or opportunistic behavior by a bull shark. They emphasized that the area beyond rope barriers was known for occasional predator activity, particularly during baitfish movements. Her remains were transported back to Mexico City under coordination of the local tourism office. A private funeral was held with only family and close friends present. Following an internal investigation, local maritime authorities issued directives requiring all small tour operators to carry working marine radios, basic first aid kits, and designate lead guides responsible for safety decisions. No fines were issued, but several permits were temporarily suspended pending compliance checks.
March 22, 2015 dawned crisp and clear in Glacier National Park, Montana. The early spring air carried the scent of melting snow as temperatures hovered at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Officer Sarah Mitchell, 29, adjusted her radio one final time as she prepared for another patrol through the remote backcountry. A dedicated wildlife conservation officer with 4 years of experience protecting Montana's wilderness, Sarah embodied the careful professionalism that made her respected among colleagues and the local community. That morning began routinely enough, with Sarah checking in with dispatch at 6:45 a.m. However, at 7:15 a.m., she received an urgent radio call about suspected poachers near a known grizzly den site in the remote Ptarmigan Creek area. The report came from a concerned hiker who had observed two men with rifles in an area clearly marked as off-limits during bear denning season. With her partner called away on a medical emergency and poachers potentially disturbing hibernating bears during the critical emergence period, Sarah faced a decision that would prove fatal. Following established protocol, she contacted her supervisor to request permission to investigate alone. Captain Torres authorized the solo patrol with specific instructions to maintain radio contact every 15 minutes. At 7:20 a.m., Sarah began the 3-mile hike to the reported location. As she approached the area, she began experiencing intermittent radio interference due to the mountainous terrain. She attempted to call in her position at 7:45 a.m. but received only static in response. Unknown to Sarah, a 400-pound female grizzly with 2 cubs had recently emerged from hibernation in a den located just 200 yards from her position. The mother bear was already under significant stress from protecting her 3-month-old cubs during their first weeks outside the den. Spring emergence is one of the most dangerous times to encounter bears, as mothers are extremely protective and have not yet established regular feeding patterns after months of hibernation. At 7:50 a.m., Sarah spotted the bear family from approximately 150 yards. Following her training, she immediately began to retreat slowly and quietly, avoiding direct eye contact and making no sudden movements. She reached for her bear spray but discovered that the canister had been damaged during her hike over rocky terrain. The bear spray canister showed clear signs of impact damage, with a dented housing and a jammed safety mechanism that prevented deployment. As she attempted to back away slowly, she stepped on a fallen branch hidden beneath a patch of snow. The branch snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the quiet forest. The sound triggered an immediate defensive response from the mother grizzly. The grizzly charged immediately, covering the 150-yard distance in less than 10 seconds. Sarah desperately attempted to deploy her damaged bear spray, but the jammed mechanism refused to function despite her frantic efforts. The massive predator struck her with the force of a small vehicle, knocking her to the ground with devastating impact. The bear's initial attack focused on neutralizing what she perceived as a threat to her cubs, using her powerful claws and crushing bite force. Sarah managed to activate her emergency beacon with her final conscious action, but the device's signal was weakened by the mountainous terrain. The attack was swift and brutal, lasting less than 2 minutes but causing injuries that would prove immediately fatal. Despite her training and experience, there was no defense against the overwhelming strength and fury of a protective mother bear. Sarah's emergency beacon continued transmitting for 6 hours before search and rescue teams could locate the signal and reach her position. The search was complicated by the same terrain and atmospheric conditions that had interfered with her radio communications. When rescuers finally reached the scene, they found evidence of the tragic encounter and Sarah's body, which had been partially moved by the bear in behavior consistent with a protective mother removing perceived threats from the vicinity of her cubs. This tragic incident led to immediate changes in park service protocols, including mandatory equipment inspections before solo patrols, improved radio systems with satellite backup capabilities, and enhanced emergency beacon technology. The 2-officer rule for bear country patrols was strengthened, with exceptions only allowed in extreme emergencies. But while the mountains of Montana claimed 1 dedicated officer due to equipment failure, the hill country of Texas would soon witness an equally tragic encounter where standard protocols would prove insufficient against nature's most elusive predator. August 7, 2016 brought sweltering heat to the hill country outside Austin, Texas. The temperature had reached 98 degrees Fahrenheit by late afternoon, with humidity levels making the heat index feel like 110 degrees. Officer Marcus Rodriguez, 34, methodically checked his equipment as he prepared to respond to multiple 911 calls about livestock attacks. A veteran K-9 officer with 8 years on the Travis County Sheriff's Department, Marcus embodied the calm professionalism that had made him one of the department's most trusted handlers. His partner for the past 3 years had been Rex, a 4-year-old German Shepherd whose intelligence and loyalty had made him legendary within the department. Rex weighed 85 pounds and had been trained at the prestigious K-9 Academy in San Antonio. That evening, Marcus received the first call at 6:30 p.m. about livestock attacks in the Bee Cave area. The initial report described a large cat that had killed 2 goats, leaving behind distinctive claw marks and partially consumed carcasses. Within the next hour, 3 additional calls came in from neighboring properties, all describing similar attacks with evidence pointing to a large mountain lion. The drought conditions that had persisted throughout the summer had created a perfect storm for human-wildlife conflicts. Natural prey animals like deer had moved closer to residential areas seeking water sources, and predators had followed them. At 7:45 p.m., Marcus and Rex arrived at the location of the most recent attack. Marcus immediately established a perimeter and called for wildlife officials, but was informed that the nearest Texas Parks and Wildlife team was responding to another mountain lion incident over 100 miles away. With darkness approaching rapidly and the predator potentially threatening residential areas where children and pets could become victims, Marcus contacted his supervisor and requested permission to track and locate the animal while maintaining a safe distance. Sergeant Chen authorized the operation with specific instructions to maintain radio contact every 10 minutes. The tracking operation began at 8:15 p.m. with Marcus and Rex following a clear trail of paw prints and scent markers left by the mountain lion. The 140-pound male mountain lion they were tracking had been pushed into the area by drought conditions and was already under significant stress. As Marcus and Rex followed the trail deeper into dense cedar breaks, Rex began showing signs of extreme agitation that Marcus had never seen before. The German Shepherd's hackles were raised, his body was tense, and he was emitting low growls that indicated he sensed immediate danger. Marcus, recognizing these warning signs, immediately called for backup and began to retreat from the area. However, the mountain lion had already detected their presence and was monitoring their movements from a concealed position. The animal felt trapped between the approaching K9 team and the open area behind it, where ranchers had been conducting their search earlier. With no clear escape route and feeling cornered by the persistent pursuit, the stressed predator made the decision to attack. Out of nowhere, the mountain lion struck with explosive violence. The attack came from above, with the cat leaping from a limestone outcropping directly onto Rex. The German Shepherd, despite his size, training, and protective instincts, was no match for the mountain lion's overwhelming power. The cat's initial strike was perfectly executed, targeting Rex's neck with crushing bite force while its powerful claws raked across the dog's body. Marcus immediately drew his service weapon and fired 3 shots in rapid succession, but the thick vegetation, fading light, and the mountain lion's rapid movement made accurate shooting nearly impossible. The sound of gunfire only served to further agitate the already stressed predator, escalating the violence of its attack on Rex. The mountain lion's assault on Rex lasted less than 30 seconds, but the damage was catastrophic. With Rex mortally wounded, the mountain lion turned its attention to Marcus, who was desperately trying to get a clear shot while calling for immediate backup on his radio. The big cat approached with fluid, silent grace, its yellow eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory intensity. Marcus managed to fire 2 more shots, one of which grazed the mountain lion's shoulder, but the wound only served to enrage the animal further. The cat leaped onto Marcus with explosive force, knocking him to the ground and causing him to lose his grip on his weapon. The mountain lion's attack on Marcus was swift and precise, targeting vital areas with instinctive efficiency. His final transmission, received by dispatch at 8:42 p.m., consisted of broken words and sounds of struggle before the radio went silent. Both Marcus and Rex had succumbed to their injuries before help could reach them. The mountain lion was later tracked and killed by wildlife officials, but the investigation revealed that Marcus had followed all established protocols and made reasonable decisions based on the information available. This tragedy led to mandatory wildlife official coordination for all large predator calls and enhanced protocols requiring immediate backup for confirmed mountain lion sightings. Yet, as terrifying as encounters with mountain lions might be, the swamps of Florida held an even more ancient and patient predator, one that would claim an officer's life during what should have been a routine pursuit with adequate backup. June 14, 2017 brought oppressive humidity to the Florida Everglades. The temperature had reached 89 degrees Fahrenheit by evening, but the humidity made it feel like a sauna. Officer James Thompson, 31, carefully adjusted his waterproof flashlight and checked his radio equipment as he coordinated with backup units in pursuit of an armed robbery suspect who had fled into the treacherous swampland. A patrol officer with 5 years of experience in rural Florida, James embodied the careful, methodical approach that had made him one of the department's most trusted officers for high-risk operations in challenging environments. He was intimately familiar with alligator encounters, having received specialized training for swamp operations through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The evening's events began at 9:15 p.m. when James and 2 backup officers responded to a 911 call about an armed robbery at a convenience store on the edge of the Everglades. The suspect, 28-year-old Michael Crawford, had robbed the store at gunpoint and fled in a stolen vehicle when police arrived. Crawford had an extensive criminal history including multiple violent felonies and a pattern of fleeing into wilderness areas to evade capture. The pursuit began on State Road 29 and continued for approximately 15 miles before Crawford's vehicle left the roadway and crashed into a drainage canal. At 9:45 p.m., Crawford abandoned his crashed vehicle and fled on foot into the Everglades, plunging into waist-deep swamp water. Despite warnings shouted by the pursuing officers, James immediately established a perimeter with his backup units, following department protocol for water-based pursuits in alligator habitat. However, approximately 10 minutes after entering the water, Crawford began calling out in apparent distress, claiming that he was drowning and couldn't swim. His cries for help became increasingly desperate, and he appeared to be struggling to stay afloat in the deeper water approximately 50 yards from shore. Department policy required officers to preserve life whenever possible, even during arrest situations involving dangerous suspects. James was faced with the choice of allowing a suspect to potentially drown or entering dangerous waters to attempt a rescue. James made the split-second decision that would cost him his life, believing that he could conduct a quick rescue with proper safety equipment and backup support. Deputy Santos immediately called for specialized swamp rescue teams and established overwatch with high-powered spotlights, while Deputy Kim maintained radio contact with dispatch. What James didn't know was that the area contained several large American alligators, including a massive 12-foot male that weighed over 600 pounds and was highly territorial during the current breeding season. This particular alligator had been monitoring the area since the vehicle crash, attracted by the unusual activity and vibrations in the water. As James waded through the dark water toward Crawford, his waterproof flashlight illuminated the path ahead, but could not penetrate the murky water to reveal what lurked beneath the surface. The attack came without warning as James reached the halfway point to Crawford's position. The massive alligator erupted from the water with explosive force, grabbing James's left leg in its powerful jaws and immediately beginning the death roll that would prove fatal. The attack was so sudden and violent that James had no opportunity to deploy any of his safety equipment or call for help. James's radio calls for assistance became garbled and desperate as the alligator's death roll made communication impossible and water began damaging his equipment. Deputies Santos and Kim immediately recognized the nature of the attack and called for emergency medical assistance while attempting to reach James's position. However, the alligator had dragged James into deeper water where the death roll continued with devastating effect. The alligator's grip was unbreakable, its serrated teeth designed specifically for holding struggling prey, while the death roll caused massive trauma to vital organs and blood vessels. The attack continued for several minutes, with the alligator's incredible strength making any rescue attempt impossible. Crawford, witnessing the horrific attack from his position in the water, managed to grab onto a fallen cypress log and was later rescued by the arriving backup unit. Specialized swamp rescue teams arrived within 15 minutes of the attack, but James had already disappeared beneath the dark water. The rescue teams used sonar equipment, underwater cameras, and trained divers to search for James's body, but the alligator had dragged him to a location where recovery was extremely dangerous. James's body was finally recovered the following morning by specialized dive teams using advanced sonar equipment and underwater robotics. The recovery operation required the temporary removal of several large alligators from the area, a dangerous and complex process that highlighted the extreme hazards faced by anyone entering these waters. Crawford, traumatized by witnessing the attack that had occurred during an attempt to save his life, provided detailed accounts to investigators that helped them understand the exact sequence of events. He was subsequently convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 15 years in prison, but he expressed genuine remorse for the role his actions had played in James's death. This incident led to enhanced swamp rescue protocols and specialized equipment for water-based pursuits in alligator habitats, emphasizing the use of specialized teams rather than individual officers for water emergencies in dangerous wildlife areas. The protocols established following James's death have successfully prevented similar tragedies while maintaining law enforcement's commitment to preserving life. But while the swamps of Florida claimed one officer during a rescue attempt, the remote deserts of Texas would soon witness an encounter where proper protocols would be abandoned due to urgent, time-sensitive circumstances. October 3, 2014 brought clear skies and moderate temperatures to Big Bend National Park, Texas. The desert air was crisp at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, with low humidity and a gentle breeze. Detective Lisa Park, 37, methodically reviewed her case notes as she prepared to investigate a time-sensitive cartel execution site near the Mexican border. An experienced homicide detective with 12 years of law enforcement experience, Lisa embodied the thorough professionalism that had made her one of the El Paso Police Department's most successful investigators in cases involving organized crime and cross-border criminal activity. Her expertise in homicide investigation had made her the lead detective on a multi-agency task force investigating drug cartel activities along the Texas-Mexico border. The urgent situation that would prove fatal began at 2:30 p.m. when Lisa received a call from DEA agent Carlos Martinez. An informant had provided GPS coordinates for a cartel execution site that intelligence indicated would be cleaned or destroyed by the end of the day. The site potentially contained evidence linking a major drug trafficking organization to a series of murders. The informant warned that the site would be sanitized by cartel cleanup crews before nightfall, creating an extremely narrow window of opportunity to collect crucial evidence. Lisa immediately requested backup support, but her regular partner was testifying in federal court and wouldn't be available for at least 8 hours. The nearest backup detective was over 4 hours away. After consulting with her supervisor, Lisa received authorization to conduct initial documentation of the scene alone, with specific instructions to photograph evidence only and retreat immediately if any dangers were encountered. She was required to maintain satellite communication contact every 30 minutes. At 3:15 p.m., Lisa arrived at the suspected cartel execution site in remote desert terrain approximately 40 miles from the nearest paved road. The crime scene showed clear evidence of recent violent activity, with disturbed earth, bloodstains, and personal effects scattered across the area. Lisa began her documentation process, photographing evidence and collecting samples while maintaining constant awareness of her surroundings. What Lisa didn't know was that a 250-pound male black bear had been frequenting the area for several weeks, attracted by food waste and garbage left behind by various cartel camps in the region. This particular bear had been conditioned to associate human activity with food sources, making it far more likely to approach humans rather than flee when encountered. At 3:45 p.m., while photographing evidence near the center of the crime scene, Lisa heard movement in the rocks approximately 50 yards away. The black bear emerged from its resting place among the rocks, initially showing typical defensive behavior by standing on its hind legs to assess the situation. Lisa followed her wildlife training perfectly, making herself appear large by raising her arms above her head, speaking in calm, firm tones, and slowly backing toward her vehicle while avoiding direct eye contact with the bear. She successfully deployed her bear spray when the animal approached within 30 feet, creating a cloud of deterrent that should have been effective. However, the desert wind conditions worked against Lisa, carrying most of the spray away from the bear and reducing its effectiveness significantly. The partially effective deterrent only served to agitate the animal further, as it had been expecting to find food in an area it had claimed as its territory. When Lisa continued her retreat toward her vehicle, she encountered the rocky, uneven terrain that characterizes much of the Big Bend region. While backing away from the bear, she stepped into a hidden depression and fell backward, landing hard on the rocky ground and temporarily stunning herself. The fall triggered the bear's predatory response, as sudden movement and the appearance of vulnerability often stimulate attack behavior in stressed or food-conditioned bears. The bear's attack was swift and determined, focusing on what it perceived as a threat to its territory and food sources. Lisa managed to draw her service weapon and fire 3 shots, but the bear's thick hide, dense muscle mass, and determination made the wounds non-fatal. Lisa's final action was to activate her GPS emergency beacon, which immediately transmitted her location and distress signal to search and rescue teams. However, the remote location meant that help was over 90 minutes away, and her injuries from the bear attack prevented her from reaching adequate shelter. Search and rescue teams reached her location within 95 minutes of the distress signal. However, despite immediate medical attention and rapid transport to a trauma center, Lisa's injuries proved fatal. The evidence Lisa had managed to collect before the attack proved crucial in the prosecution of the cartel case, leading to multiple convictions and the disruption of a major drug trafficking organization. Yet, as shocking as these wilderness encounters were, perhaps the most disturbing case would unfold in an urban setting during what should have been a routine warrant execution, where intelligence failures would place officers in contact with predators that no tactical training could have prepared them for. January 28, 2013 brought cold, overcast skies to Riverside, California. The temperature hovered at 45 degrees Fahrenheit in the pre-dawn hours as the SWAT team prepared for what intelligence reports suggested would be a routine raid on a suspected money laundering operation. Officer David Chen, 28, methodically checked his tactical gear as his SWAT team prepared to execute a warrant on what they believed was a standard financial crimes operation involving money laundering through a legitimate animal import business. A SWAT officer with 3 years of tactical experience, David embodied the precision and discipline that had made him a valued member of the Riverside Police Department's elite tactical unit. The warrant they were executing was based on a 6-month financial investigation that had identified suspicious money transfers, suggesting a sophisticated money laundering operation. The target facility, Exotic Imports International, appeared to be a legitimate business that imported small animals for pet stores and research facilities. But financial analysis had revealed patterns consistent with money laundering activities. The business owner, 45-year-old Robert Martinez, had no history of violence and was expected to surrender peacefully when confronted with the warrant. At 5:15 a.m., David's 8-member SWAT team executed the warrant following standard tactical procedures for commercial building clearing. Martinez was located in a small apartment within the facility and surrendered without resistance when confronted by the tactical team. The facility's layout was more complex than the intelligence had indicated, with multiple levels, hidden rooms, and a sophisticated ventilation system that suggested activities beyond simple animal importation. As the team progressed through the building, they discovered evidence of illegal breeding operations, including specialized enclosures, veterinary equipment, and documentation indicating the presence of prohibited species. Martinez, realizing that his illegal animal operations had been discovered, panicked, and believed that creating chaos would provide an opportunity to destroy evidence or escape. He activated emergency releases on several animal enclosures before being fully secured by the arrest team. The system simultaneously opened 3 large enclosures that housed adult chimpanzees, animals that Martinez had been illegally breeding for sale to private collectors and research facilities. Adult chimpanzees represent one of the most dangerous animals that law enforcement officers might encounter in an urban setting. These primates possess strength 5 times greater than humans, with powerful arms capable of literally tearing limbs from joints and crushing bones with ease. Their intelligence makes them unpredictable, and their social nature means that multiple animals will often act together when threatened or confused. The 3 chimpanzees that were released had been living in captivity for over 2 years, but they had not been properly socialized and were already under significant stress from the noise and commotion of the raid. When released into an unfamiliar environment filled with armed strangers wearing tactical gear, their stress levels reached critical points that triggered aggressive defensive behavior. David was clearing the main animal housing area when he encountered the first released chimpanzee, a 140-pound male that had been hiding behind overturned equipment in a state of extreme agitation. The animal, terrified and disoriented by the tactical lights, shouting, and unfamiliar surroundings, perceived the armed officers as immediate threats and attacked with explosive violence. The chimp's initial assault was devastating and immediate. The impact knocked David to the ground and caused him to lose his grip on his primary weapon, leaving him vulnerable to the continued attack. David's tactical training had prepared him for armed suspects, barricaded subjects, and hostage situations, but nothing in his experience had equipped him to fight an enraged primate whose strength and agility far exceeded human capabilities. The chimpanzee's attack was relentless and savage, using its powerful hands to grab and tear at David's tactical gear, while its sharp teeth sought vulnerable areas not protected by body armor. Sergeant Mike Torres, the team leader, immediately called for animal control and veterinary assistance while attempting to coordinate a rescue effort. However, the presence of 2 additional agitated chimpanzees in the area made any approach extremely dangerous. David managed to draw his sidearm and fire 2 shots, but the close quarters and the chimpanzee's grip on his arm made accurate shooting impossible. The gunshots only served to further agitate all 3 animals, escalating the violence of the attack and causing the other 2 chimps to move closer to the conflict. The chimpanzee's assault on David continued for nearly 4 minutes. Its powerful hands, with opposable thumbs and grip strength far exceeding human capability, made it impossible for David to break free or defend himself effectively. Animal control officers arrived at the scene within 12 minutes of Sergeant Torres's call, but they were initially unprepared for the situation they encountered. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a veterinarian specializing in primate behavior, arrived with tranquilizer equipment approximately 18 minutes after the initial attack began. Dr. Martinez was able to successfully tranquilize the attacking chimpanzee after 22 minutes, but David had already succumbed to his injuries. The 2 remaining chimpanzees were tranquilized without further incident, but the damage was done. David's teammates immediately began emergency medical treatment, but the massive trauma inflicted by the chimpanzee's prolonged attack had caused injuries that were incompatible with life. Despite the immediate response of paramedics and rapid transport to a trauma center, David was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. Martinez was charged with multiple federal crimes, including money laundering, illegal importation of endangered species, maintaining dangerous animals without proper permits, and criminally negligent homicide in David's death. This incident led to comprehensive changes in SWAT protocols and intelligence gathering procedures. New equipment was procured, including specialized protective gear designed to resist animal attacks and improved communication systems for coordinating with animal control personnel.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.